The day they sold her to a beggar, Kaela knew she was supposed to break. That's what her stepmother wanted, to watch her crumble, to see that last flicker of defiance die in her eyes. But standing in that freezing settlement square, hands bound, facing a man wrapped in filth and rags, Kaela made a choice. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not today. Not ever. This is the story of a girl who refused to be discarded, and the mysterious stranger who would become her unlikely salvation in a world that devoured the weak. If you're here for this journey, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Kaela's story travels. The cold came first, always the cold. Kaela's fingers were numb as she hauled another bucket of half-frozen water from the well, her breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. The settlement of Greystone was barely awake, just a few scattered lights in windows where people who actually mattered were probably drinking hot tea and planning their comfortable days. She wasn't one of those people. Hadn't been for 3 years, not since her father died and left her to the mercy of a woman who had none. The bucket's handle bit into her palms, adding fresh pain to the collection of bruises and cuts that decorated her hands like grotesque jewelry. She'd stopped noticing most of them. Pain was just another part of the routine now, like hunger and exhaustion, and the constant gnawing fear that today might be the day her stepmother's cruelty finally went too far. You call that moving fast? Kaela didn't flinch at the voice. She'd learned not to show reaction. Margaret Whitmore stood in the doorway of what used to be Kaela's family home, arms crossed over her considerable chest, face pinched with perpetual dissatisfaction. Behind her, Kaela could see her 2 stepsisters, Beatrice and Caroline, watching with that familiar mixture of pity and relief. Pity that it was Kaela suffering, relief that it wasn't them. "Yes, ma'am." Kaela kept her voice flat, empty. Emotion only made things worse. "Don't yes ma'am me like you've got manners. You've been out here 20 minutes for 1 bucket of water. My girls could have fetched 3 by now." Your girls wouldn't last 10 minutes doing what I do, Kaela thought, but she knew better than to say it. Instead, she just hauled the bucket toward the house, water sloshing over the rim and soaking her already damp skirt. The fabric clung to her legs, stiff with old dirt and knew her cold. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper bath. Couldn't remember the last time she'd felt clean. Margaret didn't move from the doorway, forcing Kaela to squeeze past her. The older woman's hand shot out, catching Kaela's shoulder in a grip that was all bone and malice. "Spilled water is wasted water. You'll make 2 more trips to make up for it." "I've got breakfast to start. 3 more trips." Margaret's fingers dug deeper. "And if you talk back again, it'll be 4. Kaela bit down on her tongue, tasting copper. "Yes, ma'am." The hand released her, and she stumbled forward into the house. It smelled like bacon and coffee, smells that weren't meant for her. Her breakfast, if she got one, would be whatever scraps remained after Margaret and the girls had eaten their fill. Usually that meant nothing at all. She poured the water into the large pot over the fire, then headed back out into the cold. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she'd gotten used to that too. Hunger was just noise, like the wind or Margaret's constant criticisms. You could learn to live with noise. The well was on the far edge of their property, right where the settlement proper gave way to the tree line. Greystone had been carved out of the wilderness 20 years ago, one of dozens of frontier settlements where people came looking for new starts or running from old endings. It was a hard place full of hard people, and it had gotten harder since the drought started 2 summers back. Crops failed, animals died, tempers shortened, and debts grew longer. Kaela lowered the bucket into the darkness, listening to the distant splash. The rope was rough against her damaged palms, but she barely felt it anymore. Funny how the body adapted, how much punishment it could absorb before it just stopped registering pain as anything special. "Heard Margaret's looking to marry you off." Kaela nearly dropped the rope. She spun around to find Thomas Garrett leaning against a tree, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face. He was the settlement's deputy and thought that gave him the right to say whatever he wanted to, whoever he wanted. He was probably right. "Not sure where you heard that," Kaela said carefully. She pulled the bucket up, muscles straining. "Margaret herself told my pa yesterday when he was collecting on the debt. Said she's got a solution to her money problems." Thomas pushed off from the tree, walking closer. "Said she's found someone willing to take you off her hands." Kaela's chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's her business. Gonna be yours too, seems like." Thomas stopped a few feet away, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Gotta say, I'm curious who'd be desperate enough. You're not exactly a prize, Kaela, all bones and bruises and bad attitude. Then I guess whoever it is must be pretty desperate himself. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, he is. You'll see soon enough. Margaret's got it all arranged. Wedding set for 3 days from now. 3 days? The bucket suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Who? The word came out before she could stop it. Thomas's grin widened. Now, where's the fun in spoiling the surprise? But I'll give you a hint. Hope you like crazy because you're about to get a lifetime supply. He walked away laughing, and Kaela stood there in the cold with her bucket of water and her suddenly racing heart. Margaret had threatened to marry her off before, usually when she was angry or drunk or both. But she'd never actually arranged anything, never set a date. 3 days. Kaela forced herself to move, carrying the water back to the house. Her mind spun through possibilities, each worse than the last. There weren't many unmarried men in Greystone, and the ones who were available weren't available for good reasons. Too old, too violent, too fond of drink, or too quick with their fists. Or too crazy, apparently. The rest of the morning blurred past in its usual routine of impossible tasks and casual cruelties. Make breakfast. Serve breakfast. Stand in the corner and watch them eat it. Clean up breakfast. Scrub the floors. Haul more water. Mend the fence. Feed the chickens. Wash the clothes. Hang the clothes. Take down yesterday's clothes. Iron yesterday's clothes. Margaret found fault with everything, of course. The eggs were too runny. The floors weren't clean enough. The clothes still smelled like dirt. Each complaint came with a slap or a shove or a vicious pinch to whatever part of Kaela happened to be closest. Beatrice and Caroline watched it all with the detached interest of people watching a mildly entertaining show. They were younger than Kaela by 2 and 4 years, but they'd learned their mother's lessons well. Cruelty was a currency in this house, and they spent it freely. Is it true? Caroline asked around noon while Kaela was scrubbing a pot that would never come clean no matter how hard she worked. That mother's marrying you off? Kaela didn't answer. I heard it's to that beggar who lives down by the river, Beatrice added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The one who talks to himself. Is that true, Mother? Margaret, sitting at the table mending one of her good dresses, smiled. It was the expression of a cat who'd just cornered a mouse. It's true. She didn't look up from her needlework. Darius Shaw made me an offer yesterday. Said he'd take Kaela off my hands in exchange for clearing the debt your father left us with. The pot slipped from Kayla's hands, clattering into the wash basin. What? Don't what me. You heard perfectly well. Margaret's needle kept moving, in and out, in and out. He'll pay off what we owe, and you'll be his problem instead of mine. Seems like a fair trade to me. You can't... Kaela caught herself, but too late. Margaret's head snapped up. I can't? I can't? She stood, setting aside her sewing with exaggerated care. You're going to tell me what I can and can't do? In my own house? With my own burden of a stepdaughter? That's not what I meant. You're 18 years old, unmarried, unskilled, eating my food and using my resources and contributing nothing of value. Your father left us with debts that would take 5 years to clear, and you think you have a say in how I manage them? Margaret crossed the room in 3 strides. Her hand connected with Kayla's cheek before she could dodge, the impact echoing in the small kitchen. Kayla's head snapped to the side, stars exploding across her vision. You should be thanking me. Margaret's voice was low and venomous. I could have turned you out months ago, let you starve in the streets or sell yourself to survive. Instead, I found you a husband, someone willing to take damaged goods and pay for the privilege. You should be on your knees in gratitude. Kaela straightened slowly, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. She met Margaret's eyes and saw nothing there but cold satisfaction. This woman had never cared about her, had probably been planning this from the moment Kayla's father died, just waiting for the right opportunity to dispose of her. When? Kayla's voice came out steady, which surprised her. 3 days, Sunday morning. The magistrate will perform the ceremony, and then you'll leave with your new husband. Margaret smiled again. Try to look happy about it. I'd hate for people to think I forced you into anything. That night, Kaela lay on her thin pallet in the storage room that served as her bedroom and tried to remember what hope felt like. She'd been so full of it once, back when her father was alive and the world seemed like a place with possibilities instead of just an endless series of hardships. Her father. She rarely let herself think about him anymore. It hurt too much. He'd been a good man, too good for a place like Greystone, probably. Too trusting, too kind. When he'd married Margaret, he'd thought he was giving Kaela a mother and himself a partner. He'd thought he was building something. Instead, he'd brought a viper into their home. He died in what everyone called an accident, a fall from the loft in their barn. But Kaela had seen the bruise on the back of his head, the one that didn't match the story about tripping. She'd seen the way Margaret hadn't cried at the funeral, the way she'd started changing things immediately, remaking the house in her own image, erasing every trace of the man who'd built it. Kaela had wanted to ask questions, had wanted to demand answers, but she'd been 15 and alone and suddenly very aware of how dangerous Margaret could be. So she'd stayed quiet, survived, endured. And now she was being sold like livestock to a man she'd never even spoken to, Darius Shaw. She knew the name, though she'd never paid much attention to the man himself. He lived on the outskirts of the settlement, in a shack that looked ready to collapse. People said he was mad, that he'd shown up 5 years ago raving about wars and betrayals and enemies in the shadows. The magistrate had almost turned him away, but Greystone was desperate enough for bodies, even crazy ones, that they'd let him stay. Kaela had seen him a few times, always at a distance. A tall man wrapped in rags with long dark hair and a beard that hid most of his face. He never caused trouble, never spoke to anyone if he could help it, just existed on the margins, taking odd jobs when he needed food, disappearing into the wilderness for days at a time, and apparently he had enough money to clear her father's debts. That part didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But then, nothing in Kaela's life had made sense for 3 years. Why should this be any different? She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay there in the dark and listened to the wind rattling the shutters and wondered if this was how animals felt when they were being led to slaughter. Resigned, aware, but ultimately powerless to change their fate. The next 2 days passed in a haze. Margaret was almost pleasant, which somehow made everything worse. She even gave Kaela a dress, one of Caroline's old ones, too small in the shoulders and too short in the hem, but cleaner than anything Kaela had worn in months. A wedding gift, Margaret called it, though they both knew it was really just a costume. Dress up the merchandise before you sell it. On Saturday evening, Margaret called Kaela into the main room. The fire was burning warm and Beatrice and Caroline were already dressed in their good clothes. A celebration, Kaela realized. They were treating this like an actual wedding instead of what it really was, a transaction. Sit. Margaret pointed to a stool near the fire. I'm going to fix your hair. Kaela sat, too surprised to resist. Margaret had never touched her hair before, except to grab it when she wanted to drag Kaela somewhere. But now she pulled out a brush, a real brush, not the broken comb Kaela used, and started working through the tangles with something almost resembling care. I want you to understand something, Margaret said quietly, her voice low enough that the girls couldn't hear. This isn't cruelty. This is mercy. You have no prospects here, no future. You're a reminder of a man I'm glad is dead, and every day you're in this house is a day I have to look at his face in yours. The brush caught on a knot, pulling hard. Kaela bit back a gasp. Darius Shaw is mad, yes, but he's harmless. He'll probably ignore you most of the time. Off in whatever fantasy world he lives in, you'll have a roof over your head and food in your belly, which is more than you deserve. And I'll have my home back. Margaret worked in silence for a few more minutes, then stepped back. There. You almost look presentable. Kaela caught her reflection in the darkened window. The girl looking back at her was thin and tired, with bruises on her cheek and shadows under her eyes. But her hair was smooth for once, pulled back in a simple braid. She looked like someone trying very hard to be human. Thank you, she said, because that's what you were supposed to say. Margaret's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but it was gone so fast Kaela couldn't be sure. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Kaela retreated to her storage room and lay down on her pallet, still wearing Caroline's too small dress. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she couldn't predict. Tomorrow she would stop being Margaret's problem and become someone else's. The question was whether that would be better or just differently terrible. She thought about running. The wilderness around Greystone was deadly, full of predators and bandits and terrain that could kill you in a dozen different ways. but at least it would be her choice. Her death, if it came to that, made on her own terms. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was just that after 3 years of being beaten down and diminished, she'd forgotten how to fight back, forgotten that she could make choices at all. So she stayed. And when morning came, cold and gray and unforgiving, she got up and put on Caroline's dress and let Margaret fuss with her hair one more time. She walked to the magistrate's office with her head up and her face blank, flanked by her stepmother and stepsisters like a prisoner being escorted to execution. The magistrate's office was small and cramped, smelling of old paper and older tobacco. Magistrate Hollis was already there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. A few other people had gathered, Thomas Garrett and his father, some neighbors who'd come for the spectacle, a woman Kaela didn't know who kept shooting her pitying looks, and Darius Shaw. He stood in the corner, and Kaela's first thought was that Thomas had been right about the crazy part. He was tall, taller than she'd realized, with broad shoulders hidden under layers of ragged clothes. His hair hung past his shoulders, dark and tangled. His beard covered most of his face, but she could see his eyes. They were blue, startlingly blue, and completely, utterly sane. That was what shocked her. She'd expected wildness, confusion, the unfocused gaze of someone not quite connected to reality. Instead, she saw intelligence, wariness, and something else she couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like pain. He was watching her with the same intensity she was watching him, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the crowded room. Then Margaret's hand closed around Kaela's arm, steering her forward. "Don't just stand there gawking. We haven't got all day." The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. Magistrate Hollis read from a book that had clearly been used for dozens of weddings before this one, his voice monotone and bored. "Do you take this man? Do you take this woman? I now pronounce you." The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. Kaela spoke her lines when prompted, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. Darius's voice when he spoke was deep and rough, like he didn't use it often. He didn't look at her during the vows, just kept his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder. When it was done, Magistrate Hollis produced a piece of paper. "Sign here, both of you." Kaela's hand cramped around the pen as she signed her name. Kaela Shaw now, she supposed, though it didn't feel real. Darius signed with surprising ease, his handwriting neat and precise despite the tremor in his hands. Not the handwriting of a madman. "Excellent." Margaret stepped forward with a smile that made Kaela's stomach turn. "Now, about the debt." Darius reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. It made a heavy sound when he set it on the magistrate's desk. 400 silver, that's what you said." 400 silver. Kaela's breath caught. That was more money than most people in Greystone saw in 2 years. Where had a beggar living in a shack gotten that kind of money? Margaret's eyes gleamed as she opened the pouch, counting quickly. "It's all here." She looked up at Darius with something that might have been respect if it weren't so thoroughly poisoned by greed. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Shaw." "I'm sure it was." Darius's voice was flat. He turned to Kaela. "Ready?" She wanted to say no. Wanted to scream that she wasn't ready, would never be ready, that this was insane and wrong and she was terrified. But Margaret was watching with that satisfied smile, and Beatrice and Caroline were whispering behind their hands, and everyone else was looking at her with varying degrees of pity and curiosity. So she lifted her chin and said, "Yes." They walked out of the magistrate's office together into a morning that was somehow even colder than before. Kaela had expected Darius to say something, but he just started walking, and after a moment she followed. Behind them, she could hear Margaret laughing, the sound carrying on the wind like a curse. They walked through Greystone in silence, past the buildings where Kaela had spent her entire life, past the people who'd watched her suffer and done nothing. Some of them stared. Some looked away. None of them spoke to her. Darius led her to the edge of the settlement, where the houses gave way to wilderness. His shack was exactly as terrible as she'd imagined. Rough wood, gaps in the walls, a roof that looked like it leaked more than it protected. But he walked past it without stopping. "Where are we going?" Kaela asked, her voice cracking from disuse. "Away from here." Darius didn't slow down. "Unless you want to stay." She looked back at Greystone, at the only home she'd ever known. A place that had destroyed her piece by piece, day by day, until there was almost nothing left. No, I don't want to stay. Good. He adjusted the pack on his shoulders. Because neither do I. You're leaving? Now. But you just spent 400 silver. I spent 400 silver buying you out of hell. He finally looked at her, and she was struck again by how clear his eyes were. What you do with that freedom is up to you. You can come with me, or you can figure something else out. But I'm done with this settlement and everything in it. Kaela's mind raced. Leave Greystone? Just walk away? She'd never been more than a few miles from the settlement in her entire life. The wilderness was deadly. She had no supplies, no skills, no idea how to survive out there. But staying meant going back to Margaret, back to the beatings and the hunger and the daily erosion of everything that made her human. If I come with you, she heard herself say, where are we going? Somewhere else. Darius started walking again. Somewhere they won't find me. Who won't find you? He didn't answer, just kept moving, and Kaela realized she had to make a choice. Right now. This moment. Stay in the world she knew, where every day was agony, but at least it was predictable. Or step into the unknown with a stranger who might be crazy, might be dangerous, might be something else entirely. She thought about her father, about the man who'd always told her she was strong, capable, deserving of better. She thought about the girl she used to be before Margaret ground her down into nothing, and then she took a step, and another, and another. Darius glanced back once, something that might have been approval flickering across his face. Then he turned forward and kept walking, and Kaela followed him into the wilderness, leaving Greystone and everything it represented behind. The trees closed around them like a door shutting on the past. The cold bit deeper here, where the settlement's buildings didn't block the wind. Kaela's dress, Caroline's dress, was too thin, and she had no coat. She was going to freeze before nightfall. But at least she'd be free when it happened. They walked for what felt like hours, Darius setting a pace that was brutal but not impossible. He didn't speak, didn't look back to see if she was keeping up. Just moved through the forest like he knew exactly where he was going, like he'd walked this path 1,000 times before. Kaela's legs burned and her lungs ached, but she kept moving. She'd survived 3 years with Margaret. She could survive this. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Darius stopped. They were in a clearing surrounded by thick pines with a rocky outcropping on one side that would provide some shelter from the wind. We'll camp here. He shrugged off his pack and started pulling out supplies. A bedroll, a fire kit, some wrapped parcels that might be food. Kaela stood there uselessly, watching him work. She'd never camped before. Never built a fire or set up a shelter or any of the 100 things you needed to know to survive in the wild. She was utterly, completely unprepared for this. Darius must have sensed her panic because he looked up, his expression unreadable. You know how to make a fire? No? Cook? In a kitchen, not this. Hunt? Fish? Set snares? No. Her voice was getting smaller with each admission. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. Of course not. Why would Margaret let you learn anything useful? He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. Sit down before you fall down. I'll teach you. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why did you do this? Why spend all that money on me? You don't even know me. Darius was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, because I know what it's like to be trapped. To have everyone tell you who you are and what you're worth, and to feel that truth settling into your bones like poison. He met her eyes. I saw you at the well sometimes, saw the bruises, the way you moved like you were trying not to be noticed, and I thought, maybe I could give you a different option. I could have run away on my own, maybe. Probably would have died trying, but maybe. He knelt and started arranging kindling. This way you've got supplies, a guide, a chance. You're not crazy. It wasn't a question. No. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Just dangerous. There's a difference. And the people you said won't find you are very real, and if they do, they'll kill me. Probably kill you too, just for being associated with me. He struck flint against steel, sending sparks into the kindling. Still want to come along? Kaela thought about it, really thought about it. This man was a stranger. He'd admitted he was dangerous, admitted people were hunting him. Everything about this situation screamed that she should run. But he'd also spent 400 silver to set her free. He'd asked her what she wanted. He was teaching her how to survive instead of expecting her to already know. And when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see a master looking at property. She saw one trapped person recognizing another. "Yes," she said, "I still want to come along." The fire caught, flames licking up through the kindling. Darius nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get started. You've got a lot to learn, and winter's coming fast." He was right. She had everything to learn: how to build a fire and purify water and identify safe plants, how to move quietly and read tracks and know when danger was close, how to be something other than a victim. But as Kaela sat there in the growing darkness, warming her hands by a fire that she'd helped build, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt like maybe, possibly, she could become whoever she wanted to be. And that was worth any amount of danger. The first lesson was fire, and Kaela failed at it 7 times before her frozen fingers finally coaxed a spark into flame. By then, the sun had set completely, and the temperature had dropped to something that felt like it could crack bone. Darius watched her struggle without offering help, which infuriated her until she realized he was doing it on purpose. If he did it for her, she'd never learn. When the flames finally caught and held, she felt a surge of something close to pride. Small victory, but hers. "Good," Darius said, and that single word felt like more approval than she'd received in 3 years. He handed her a piece of dried meat and a hunk of bread that was harder than the rocks they sat on. "Eat. We've got a long day tomorrow." The food was tough and bland, but it was food. Kaela tore into it like a starving animal, which she supposed she was. Her stomach cramped at the sudden influx, unaccustomed to actually being filled. She forced herself to eat slowly, to make it last. Across the fire, Darius was checking weapons she hadn't noticed before. A long knife, a hatchet, something that might have been a short sword wrapped in oiled cloth. He moved with the careful precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, every motion economical and purposeful. "Where did you get the money?" Kaela asked, because the silence was starting to feel oppressive. 400 silver isn't something a beggar should have. I wasn't always a beggar." He didn't look up from his work. "And I've been saving for 5 years. Knew I'd need it eventually." "For what?" "For leaving, for supplies, for buying freedom when I found someone who needed it." He paused. "Didn't think it would be today, but Margaret made me an offer and I took it." "She came to you?" "Yesterday morning. Said she had a problem and I had money she wanted." His mouth twisted. "She's not subtle, your stepmother." "She's not my stepmother anymore." The words felt strange, but good. "I don't have to claim her now." "No, you don't." Darius finally looked up, and something in his expression softened. "You don't have to claim anything from your old life. You're free of it. Free." The word felt too big, too impossible. Freedom wasn't something that happened to girls like her. Freedom was for people with money and power and options, not for 18-year-old girls with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a stranger for a husband. "You never answered my question," she said. "The one about who's hunting you." "No, I didn't." "Are you going to?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then he sighed. 3 years ago, I led a company of soldiers in the border wars. 200 men under my command, fighting for territory that didn't matter against enemies who were just trying to survive, same as us." Kaela went very still. She'd heard stories about the border wars. Everyone had. Brutal conflicts that had raged for years before finally burning themselves out. Thousands dead. Entire settlements destroyed. The kind of violence that left scars on the survivors. "We were winning," Darius continued, his voice flat and distant. "Had the enemy pinned down, victory practically guaranteed. Then my second in command, a man named Garrett Voss, decided he wanted my position, wanted the glory. So he made a deal with the enemy, let them slaughter my men in exchange for safe passage and a promotion when the dust settled." "What happened?" "I survived. Barely. Crawled out of a mass grave and spent 6 months hunting Voss down. When I found him, he was exactly where he said he'd be, promoted, decorated, celebrated as a hero." Darius's hands had stopped moving. "I killed him. In front of witnesses. Made sure everyone knew exactly what he'd done." Kayla's breath caught. You were arrested. Should have been executed. Would have been, except I knew things. Had information that certain powerful people didn't want made public. So we made a deal. They'd let me disappear, and I'd take my secrets to the grave. His smile was bitter. But some of Voss's friends didn't like that arrangement. Didn't like that I got to live while their ally died in disgrace. They've been looking for me ever since. How many?
Friends? Dozens? People actively hunting me? He shrugged. 4 that I know of, maybe more by now. 4 trained soldiers hunting one man. Those weren't good odds. Kaela should have been terrified, should have demanded he take her back to Greystone immediately. But instead, she found herself asking, why didn't you run farther? Why stay anywhere near civilization?
Because running forever isn't living, and I thought maybe if I kept my head down and played the madman, they'd give up, think I'd lost my mind and wasn't worth the effort. He met her eyes. I was wrong. How do you know? Because 2 weeks ago, I saw one of them in Greystone, just passing through, asking questions. Didn't see me, but it's only a matter of time. He started wrapping his weapons back up. That's why we're leaving. That's why we're not stopping. The implications settled over Kaela like a weight. She wasn't just running from Margaret. She was running from trained killers who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone associated with their target. She'd traded one kind of danger for another, possibly worse one. But at least this danger came with a choice, with agency, with the possibility of fighting back. Teach me, she said. Darius looked up sharply. What? Whatever you know. How to fight, how to survive, how to not be useless. She leaned forward, intensity replacing fear. If we're doing this, if we're running, I'm not going to be dead weight. I'm not going to be something you have to protect. Teach me. For the first time since she'd met him, Darius smiled. Really smiled, not just that bitter twist of his mouth. You're serious. Completely. It's going to hurt. You're going to fail, repeatedly, and we don't have time for a gentle learning curve. I spent 3 years getting beaten by a woman who hated me. I can handle pain. Kaela's jaw set. What I can't handle is being helpless. Darius studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we start tomorrow, but tonight, you sleep. You're going to need it. He wasn't wrong. Kaela wrapped herself in the spare blanket he gave her, thin but better than nothing, and lay down near the fire. The ground was hard and cold, and every sound in the darkness made her flinch. Wolves howling in the distance, wind through the branches, something large moving through the underbrush. She thought she wouldn't sleep, but exhaustion dragged her under eventually. Her dreams were fragmented and strange. Margaret's face morphing into a wolf's, her father calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach, hands grabbing at her from the darkness. She woke to Darius shaking her shoulder, the sky barely light. Up, we need to move before full dawn. Everything hurt. Muscles she didn't know she had screamed in protest as she forced herself upright. Darius was already breaking camp with practiced efficiency, erasing evidence of their presence. Kaela tried to help but mostly just got in the way. They ate quickly, more dried meat and stale bread, then started walking. Darius set a punishing pace, moving through the forest like he was being chased. Maybe he was. Kaela stumbled after him, her too short dress catching on branches, her thin shoes offering no protection against rocks and roots. After what felt like hours but was probably less, she finally asked, "Where are we going?" "North. There's a trading post about 40 miles from here, run by a woman who owes me a favor. We can get proper supplies there. Clothes that fit, real weapons." He didn't slow down. "After that, we keep going. Put as much distance between us and Greystone as possible." 40 miles. Kaela had never walked 40 miles in her life. Hell, she'd probably never walked 10. But she gritted her teeth and kept moving, because what else could she do? Give up? Go back? Those weren't options anymore. Around midday, Darius stopped by a stream. "Drink, refill your water skin. We won't stop again for a while." Kaela collapsed beside the water, gulping it down too fast. Her stomach cramped in protest, but she didn't care. She was so thirsty she could have drunk the entire stream. "Slower," Darius said, not unkindly. "You'll make yourself sick." She forced herself to slow down, sipping instead of gulping. Across the stream, Darius was scanning the trees with that constant wariness she was starting to recognize. He never fully relaxed, never let his guard down, always watching, always ready. "First lesson," he said abruptly. "Awareness." Most people die in the wilderness because they don't pay attention. They don't see the signs until it's too late. What signs? Everything. Broken branches that weren't broken yesterday. Tracks that don't belong. Birds going silent when they should be singing. The smell of smoke when there shouldn't be fire. He pointed to a spot upstream. See there? That stone's been moved recently. Someone crossed here in the last day or two. Kaela squinted at the spot. All she saw were rocks and water. How can you tell? The moss on the underside, still wet but not slimy, means it was flipped within the last 24 hours. He moved to another spot. And here, boot print, partially washed away but still visible. Size 11, heavy tread, male, probably carrying a pack. Could be a trapper, a hunter. Could be. Or could be someone looking for me. Darius straightened. That's why awareness matters. You need to know what normal looks like so you can spot abnormal. They continued and Darius kept up a steady stream of instruction. How to read the angle of sunlight to tell direction. How to identify edible plants versus poisonous ones. How to move quietly, placing your feet carefully instead of crashing through the underbrush like Kaela had been doing. It was overwhelming. Every piece of information seemed critically important, and Kaela's brain struggled to hold it all. But she tried. She asked questions. She repeated things back until Darius nodded approval. By the time the sun started to set, she was ready to collapse. Her feet were bleeding inside her shoes, her legs trembled with every step. But Darius showed no signs of stopping. Please, she finally gasped. Can we rest? He glanced back at her, and something in his expression shifted. How bad are your feet? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Kaela hesitated, then admitted, bad. Darius cursed under his breath and found a sheltered spot among some rocks. Sit. Let me see. She sat, and he knelt in front of her, pulling off her shoes with surprising gentleness. Her stockings were soaked through with blood. When he peeled them away, she saw blisters the size of coins, several already burst and raw. Why didn't you say something? His voice was sharp with something that might have been anger or might have been concern. Because we needed to keep moving. You said so yourself. Not at the cost of crippling yourself. He dug through his pack, producing a small tin of salve. This is going to hurt. It did. Kaela bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood as he cleaned and treated the wounds, then wrapped her feet in clean cloth. His hands were steady and competent, nothing like the brutal efficiency she'd come to expect from people touching her. You should have said something earlier, he repeated, softer this time. I need to know when you're struggling. Otherwise, I can't help. I thought you wanted me to be tough. Tough doesn't mean stupid. There's a difference between pushing through discomfort and ignoring serious injury. He sat back, studying her. You're not with Margaret anymore. You don't have to hide weakness from me. The words hit harder than they should have. Kaela looked away, blinking against the sudden burning in her eyes. She would not cry. She'd stopped crying years ago, when she realized tears only made Margaret hit harder. Thank you, she managed. Darius nodded and started setting up camp. This time, Kaela helped, or tried to. She built the fire herself, only needing 3 attempts instead of 7. Progress. They ate in silence, and Kaela's mind drifted to the reality of their situation. 2 people alone in the wilderness, running from killers, with winter closing in. The smart thing would be to give up, to accept that this was impossible and turn back before it was too late. But Kaela was so tired of doing the smart thing, so tired of surviving instead of living. Tomorrow, Darius said, breaking the silence, we start combat training, basic self-defense. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep you alive if something goes wrong. Something? You mean someone? Both. He poked at the fire. The wilderness has plenty of things that want to kill you. Might as well learn how to fight back against all of them. That night, Kaela's sleep was fractured by nightmares again. But this time, when something grabbed her in the darkness, she fought. She lashed out, connected with something solid. Easy! It's me! She woke fully to find herself sitting up, fist raised, with Darius holding her wrist. He looked more surprised than hurt. You were screaming, he said. Bad dream? Kaela's heart was racing. She pulled her hand away, embarrassed. Sorry, I thought, don't apologize for defending yourself. Even asleep. He released her and moved back. But maybe work on recognizing friendly versus hostile before you take a swing. I'll try. She lay back down, but sleep wouldn't return. Instead, she stared up at the stars visible through the tree canopy and wondered what her father would think of all this. Would he be proud that she'd escaped? Horrified that she'd married a stranger? Disappointed that she hadn't been stronger sooner? She'd never know. He was gone, and she was here, and all she could do was keep moving forward. The next morning, true to his word, Darius started teaching her to fight. It began with stance, how to stand in a way that gave you balance and mobility. Her first attempt was wrong. So was her second, third, fourth. By the 10th attempt, she was close enough that Darius didn't immediately correct her. Good. Now someone comes at you, you don't try to overpower them. You're smaller, lighter, probably weaker. You use that. He demonstrated, moving with a speed that shocked her. Low, fast, unpredictable. Go for vulnerable spots, eyes, throat, groin, knees. That's not fair fighting. Fair fighting is how you die. His expression was grim. Out here, there's no such thing as honor. There's only survival, remember that. He taught her basic strikes, basic blocks, how to break a hold if someone grabbed her. She failed repeatedly, her movements clumsy and slow. But gradually, through constant repetition and correction, her body started to learn. Muscle memory began to form. They drilled while they walked, Darius calling out scenarios and making her respond. Attack her from behind, what do you do? Strike back with elbow, twist, go for the throat. Someone grabs your wrist. Rotate against the thumb, it's the weakest point. It was exhausting and frustrating and occasionally painful when she misjudged a movement and caught a branch or rock. But it was also empowering. Every technique she learned was one more tool in her arsenal, one more option besides helplessness. On the third day, they reached the edge of a ravine. The trading post was on the other side, Darius said, but the bridge that should have been there was gone. Burned from the look of the charred remains still clinging to the far side. Bandits, Darius said quietly. They burned the bridges to force people into ambush spots. Kaela's stomach dropped. So what do we do? We cross anyway. There's a place downstream where the ravine narrows. We can climb down one side and up the other. He glanced at her. It's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than starving up here. Fair point. They found the narrow spot an hour later. It was maybe 15 feet across, but the drop was at least 30 feet to a rocky stream below. The walls were steep but climbable, with enough handholds that someone experienced could manage it. Kaela was not experienced. I'll go first, Darius said. Watch exactly where I put my hands and feet. Follow the same path. Don't rush. Don't look down. Just focus on the next hold. He made it look easy, descending with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Kaela watched carefully, trying to memorize the route. Then it was her turn. The first few feet were manageable. Then she made the mistake of looking down, and vertigo hit her like a physical blow. The rocks below seemed to reach up for her, promising a quick and brutal end. Eyes up, Darius's voice came from below, sharp with command. Look at the wall, not the drop. Kaela forced her gaze up, focusing on the rock in front of her face. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the holds. One foot slipped, sending a shower of loose stones cascading down. She heard them hit the stream with faint splashes that seemed to take forever to arrive. You're doing fine, Darius called, his voice calmer now. Just keep moving, one hold at a time. She made it halfway down before her foot slipped again, this time more seriously. For one terrifying moment, she was dangling by her hands, feet scrabbling for purchase on smooth rock. Her fingers started to slip. To your left! 6 inches! There's a ledge! She found it barely, got her feet under her, kept going because stopping now meant falling, and falling meant dying. When she finally reached the bottom, her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the rocky bank. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline coursing through her system like poison. Breathe, Darius said, crouching beside her. You did it. Hardest part's done. Kaela wanted to laugh at that. The hardest part was done? They still had to climb up the other side, still had to reach the trading post, still had to outrun trained killers who wanted Darius dead. But she forced herself upright and looked at the opposite wall. It was steeper than the first, with fewer obvious handholds. Her hands were already raw and bleeding from the climb down. Can we rest? The question came out weaker than she intended. Darius scanned the ravine, that constant wariness back in his expression. 5 minutes. Then we move. This is a perfect spot for an ambush, and I don't want to be here longer than necessary. They rested, and Kaela tried to ignore the way her hands throbbed. Tried to ignore the voice in her head saying she couldn't do this, that she was going to fall, that she should have stayed in Greystone, where at least the dangers were familiar. When the 5 minutes were up, Darius started climbing. This ascent took longer, his movements more careful. Kaela watched and memorized, then began her own climb. This one was harder. Her hands kept slipping on smooth rock. Her arms burned with fatigue. Halfway up, she found herself stuck, unable to see the next handhold, too scared to move. "Above you," Darius called. "Root growing out of a crack. Use that." She found it, tested her weight. The root held. She pulled herself up, found the next hold, kept climbing. Her vision narrowed to just the rock in front of her, the next grip, the next placement. The world became very small and very immediate. When her hand finally closed on solid ground at the top, she almost couldn't believe it. Darius grabbed her wrist and hauled her up the last few feet, and she sprawled on the dirt, gasping. "You're stronger than you think," he said, and there was something like respect in his voice. Kaela didn't feel strong. She felt like every muscle in her body had been set on fire and then beaten with hammers. But she'd made it. She'd done something that terrified her, and she'd survived. "The trading post isn't far," Darius said. "Another mile, maybe. Can you make it?" She wanted to say no, wanted to lie there until her body stopped screaming in protest. But she forced herself to stand, forced herself to nod. Yes. They walked through forests that gradually gave way to cleared land, and finally, the trading post came into view. It was bigger than Kaela expected, a main building surrounded by several smaller structures, all enclosed by a wooden palisade. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and she could hear voices, the sound of normal human activity. It felt surreal after days in the wilderness, like they'd stepped from one world into another. Darius approached the gate cautiously, one hand resting on the knife at his belt. A guard emerged, a woman with iron-gray hair and a crossbow that looked well used. "State your business. Looking for Martha Kane. Tell her an old friend is here to collect on a debt." The guard's eyes narrowed, studying Darius. Then recognition flickered across her face. "Shaw? That you under all that hair? It's me. Thought you were dead. Hell, most people think you're dead." She lowered the crossbow slightly. "Martha's gonna be surprised." Good surprised or bad surprised? With Martha? Who knows? The guard opened the gate. "Come on. But the girl stays with me until Martha clears you both." Kaela started to protest, but Darius caught her eye and gave a slight shake of his head. "Trust me," the gesture said. "Accepte. So she stayed with the guard while Darius disappeared into the main building. The woman watched her with curiosity but didn't speak. Kaela shifted her weight from foot to foot, acutely aware of how terrible she must look, filthy, ragged, covered in cuts and bruises. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, Darius emerged with a woman who could only be Martha Kane. She was short and round, with sharp eyes and a sharper mouth. "So you finally decided to cash in," Martha said, looking Darius up and down. "Took you long enough." "Circumstances changed." "I can see that." Martha's gaze shifted to Kaela. "Who's the girl?" "My wife." Martha's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Your wife? You married? That's unexpected." "Life's full of surprises." Darius moved to stand beside Kaela, a subtle statement of solidarity. "We need supplies, clothes, weapons, food for 2 weeks, and information. Information's expensive." "I've got money." "Of course you do." Martha gestured toward the main building. "Come on inside, let's talk business." They followed her into a large room that served as both trading post and common area. Several people were there drinking and talking, and they all stopped to stare at the newcomers. Kaela felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging. Martha led them to a private room in the back. "Sit. Tell me what you need." Darius laid out their requirements. Practical clothing that would hold up to hard travel, a proper knife for Kaela, ammunition for the weapons he already had, dried goods and preserved meat, medical supplies. The list was long and expensive. Martha listened, making notes, her expression growing more serious. "You're planning to be gone a while." "Yes." "Anyone I should know about looking for you?" "Possibly. Has anyone come through asking questions?" Martha's expression darkened. "2 men. Week ago. asking about a former soldier, dark hair, late 30s, might be going by Shaw. I told them I didn't know anyone matching that description. Kayla's blood went cold. They were close, closer than she'd thought. Did they believe you? Darius asked. Don't know, don't care. Martha leaned back in her chair. You saved my son's life in the border wars, Shaw. I don't forget debts like that. If someone's hunting you, they'll get nothing from me.
Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just because I won't help them doesn't mean others won't. You need to assume words out. Assume people know you're in the area. She tapped her notes. I can get you everything on this list, but it's going to take a day, maybe two. Can you wait that long? Darius looked at Kaela, a silent question. She nodded. Her feet needed the rest, even if her nerves didn't.
We'll wait, Darius said. But we need a secure place to stay, somewhere away from the common areas. I've got a cabin out back. Used to store overflow stock, but it's empty now. You can have it. Martha stood. I'll start gathering supplies. You two get cleaned up. You look like hell. She left, and Kaela finally let herself slump in the chair. They'd made it. They'd crossed the ravine, reached the trading post, secured supplies. Small victories, but important ones.
You did well, Darius said quietly. I barely made it down that ravine. But you made it. That's what matters.
He stood, offering his hand. Come on. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. Tomorrow, we'll worry about tomorrow. The cabin Martha provided was small but clean, with 2 beds and a stove that actually worked. There was a pump outside for water and soap, real soap, not the lye mixture Kaela had been using in Greystone. She scrubbed herself raw, washing away days of dirt and sweat and fear. When she emerged, dressed in the spare clothes Martha had provided, simple but clean and actually the right size, she felt almost human again. Darius had cleaned up too, his hair and beard trimmed short enough that she could finally see his face properly. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, with a strong jaw and eyes that held too much experience for someone his age. Without the rags and the deliberate appearance of instability, he looked exactly like what he'd claimed to be, a soldier, someone competent and dangerous and not to be underestimated. Better? He asked. Much. They ate dinner in the cabin, real hot food from Martha's kitchen, the best meal Kaela had eaten in years. She forced herself to eat slowly, to not make herself sick, but it was hard when everything tasted so good. What happens after we leave here? She asked. We keep moving north. There's a mountain range about 2 weeks from here, remote, defensible, with enough resources to survive winter if we're careful. We can hole up there until spring, then reassess. And after spring? Darius was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I've been running for so long I stopped thinking about after. He met her eyes. What do you want to happen? It was such a simple question, but it stunned her. What did she want? No one had asked her that in years. No one had cared. She struggled to find words. I want to not be scared anymore. I want to be strong enough that no one can hurt me again. She stopped, the intensity of her own emotion catching her off guard. You want to matter, Darius finished softly. To be someone who can't be discarded. Yes. Then that's what we'll work toward. He stood, moving to one of the beds. Get some sleep, real sleep, in a real bed. Might be the last chance we get for a while. Kaela lay down on the other bed, and for the first time since leaving Greystone, she felt safe enough to truly rest. The mattress was thin and lumpy, but compared to sleeping on the ground, it was luxury. She closed her eyes and sleep came quickly. No nightmares this time, just deep, dreamless darkness. She woke to the sound of shouting outside. It was still dark, maybe an hour before dawn. Darius was already up, weapons in hand, his expression grim. Stay here, he said. What's happening? I don't know, but nothing good. He moved to the door, and Kayla's heart hammered in her chest. She could hear voices now, angry and aggressive, the sound of steel being drawn. Someone screamed. Darius glanced back at her. No matter what happens, stay in this cabin. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Martha. Darius, promise me. She wanted to argue, to say she could help, to insist she wouldn't hide while he went into danger, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't negotiable. I promise. He nodded once, then slipped out into the darkness. Kaela rushed to bar the door, her hands shaking. Through the small window, she could see flames rising from the main building. could hear screams and the clash of weapons. The trading post was under attack, and she was trapped inside, helpless, while everything outside descended into chaos. Kaela pressed herself against the wall beside the window, watching shadows move against the firelight. The screaming had gotten worse, raw animal sounds of people dying. The clash of steel rang out sharp and irregular, punctuated by shouts and curses she couldn't make out. She'd promised to stay, had given Darius her word. But every instinct in her body screamed to do something, anything other than cower in this cabin while people fought and died outside. A figure stumbled past the window, clutching their side. Blood poured between their fingers. They fell 5 feet from the door and didn't get up. Kayla's hand went to the door bar before she could think. She stopped, Darius's words echoing in her head. Don't open it for anyone but me or Martha. But that person was dying, right there, close enough that she could hear their labored breathing. The decision made itself. She lifted the bar and cracked the door open. Hey, she called softly. Can you move? The figure's head turned. It was a young man, maybe 20, with terror written across his face. Please! Crawl! Get to the door. I'll pull you inside. He tried. Made it maybe 2 feet before collapsing again. Kaela cursed and stepped out, grabbing his arms, dragging him toward the cabin. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight fighting against her grip. Her wounded feet screamed in protest, but she kept pulling, inch by inch. She'd almost gotten him to the threshold when she heard the footsteps behind her. Well, what do we have here? Kaela spun. The man standing there was built like a bear, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw and a sword still dripping with blood. He smiled when he saw her, and it was the kind of smile that made her stomach drop. Pretty little thing, you hiding in there? Kaela didn't answer. Her mind raced through everything Darius had taught her. Stance, balance, vulnerable spots. She had no weapon, nothing but her hands and whatever she could improvise. The man took a step closer. Come on now, we're just looking for someone. Old friend, you tell me where Darius Shaw is, and maybe I let you live. So that's what this was. Not random bandits. A targeted attack. They'd found him. I don't know who that is, Kaela said, backing toward the door. Liar. Another step. We saw him come in here with you. Watched the whole thing. Martha Kane's been hiding him, and now she's paying for it. Martha. The woman who'd given them shelter, who'd owed Darius a debt and refused to betray him. Kaela felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Where is he? The man demanded. I told you, I don't. He lunged. Kaela threw herself sideways, barely avoiding his grab. Her hand closed on a piece of firewood stacked beside the cabin. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. When he came at her again, she swung with everything she had. The wood connected with his temple. Not hard enough to drop him, but enough to stagger him. He roared in anger, and Kaela ran. Not into the cabin, that would trap her. Instead, she bolted toward the main compound, toward the chaos and the fire. Bad plan. Terrible plan. But the man was behind her and gaining, and at least in the chaos she might find help. The compound was hell. Bodies lay scattered across the ground. The main building was fully engulfed in flames, lighting everything in flickering orange. People fought in small clusters, trading postcards against attackers who moved with military precision. Kaela spotted Darius near the eastern wall, fighting 2 men at once. He moved like violence given form, all economy and brutal efficiency. But he was bleeding from a cut across his ribs, and there were too many enemies. She started toward him, and something hit her from behind, driving her to the ground. The scarred man landed on top of her, crushing the air from her lungs. Thought you could run? He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. I'm going to enjoy. Kaela twisted, went for his eyes like Darius had taught her. Her fingers found soft tissue. The man howled and reared back, and she used the momentum to buck him off. Scrambled to her feet. Her piece of firewood was gone, lost somewhere in the dirt. The man recovered faster than she expected, one hand pressed to his bleeding eye. You little... Hey! They both turned. Martha Kane stood there with her crossbow raised, already loaded. She didn't hesitate. The bolt took the scarred man in the chest, punching through leather armor like it was paper. He looked down at the shaft protruding from his sternum, surprised, then collapsed. Get to the stables, Martha shouted at Kaela. Shaw's horse is there. Brown mare. White star. Take her and run. I'm not leaving.
You're the reason they're here. They followed you. Martha was already reloading, her movement swift despite the chaos. They want Shaw dead and anyone connected to him. You stay. More people die. So go! The words hit like a physical blow. This was her fault. All these deaths, this destruction, because she'd been weak enough to need saving, because Darius had been stupid enough to save her. Martha, go!
Kaela ran. Past the fighting, past the flames, toward the stables at the back of the compound. Behind her, she heard Martha's crossbow loose again, heard someone scream, didn't look back. The stables were chaos, panicked horses kicking at their stalls, smoke starting to drift in from the main fire. Kaela found the brown mare exactly where Martha said, already saddled like someone had been preparing for a quick escape. Smart woman, Martha, prepared for everything. Kaela had ridden exactly twice in her life, both times years ago. But she hauled herself into the saddle and grabbed the reins, hoping muscle memory was a real thing. The mare danced nervously, picking up on her fear. Easy, Kaela whispered, trying to sound calm despite her racing heart. We're gonna... The stable doors exploded inward. A man stepped through the smoke, and Kayla's breath caught. She recognized him from Greystone, one of the men who'd been asking questions, who Darius said was hunting him. He was older than the scarred man, with cold eyes and a face that held no mercy. His sword was clean, unused. He hadn't been fighting. He'd been searching. Darius Shaw's wife, he said, and it wasn't a question. I'm Garrett Voss's brother. You know that name? Kayla's hand tightened on the reins. The man Darius had killed, the traitor who'd murdered 200 soldiers for advancement. I know it. Good. Then you understand why I'm here. He moved closer, blocking her exit. Where's Shaw? Fighting your men. Not for long. He's outnumbered 4-1. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He killed my brother, destroyed his name, made our family a laughingstock. I've spent 3 years hunting him, and tonight, it ends. The mare shifted beneath Kaela, sensing her tension. The man was too close to the doors. If she tried to run, he'd catch her before she got 5 feet. So she made a choice. A stupid, reckless choice that Darius would probably kill her for if this didn't kill her first. She kicked the mare, hard. The horse exploded forward, straight at the man. He dove sideways, but not fast enough. The mare's shoulder caught him, sent him sprawling. Kaela burst through the stable doors into smoke-filled air, the mare's hooves thundering against packed dirt. She had no idea where she was going, no plan beyond get away. The compound was a maze of burning buildings and fighting people. She guided the mare around bodies, around flames, toward what she hoped was an exit. An arrow whistled past her head. Another buried itself in the saddle, inches from her leg. Someone was shooting at her. Multiple someones, from the sound of it. The mare screamed and stumbled. Another arrow, this one finding flesh. The horse went down hard, and Kaela barely managed to kick free before 1,000 pounds of panicked animal crashed to the ground. She rolled, came up running on feet that had gone numb with pain. The eastern wall. She could see it through the smoke. If she could just reach it, maybe climb over, maybe... Someone grabbed her from behind, spun her around. She lashed out blindly, connected with something that felt like a nose. Blood sprayed hot across her face. The grip loosened and she twisted free, kept running. She made it 10 more feet before she hit the wall. Literally, ran straight into it in the smoke and darkness. Stars exploded across her vision. She staggered, trying to orient herself, trying to find a gate or a break in the palisade. Kaela! Darius's voice, raw and desperate. She turned toward it and saw him fighting his way through the chaos, 3 men between him and her. He was moving slower now, favoring his left side where blood had soaked through his shirt. Run! He shouted. Don't wait for me! But where? The wall was solid behind her. Enemies ahead, no weapons, no way out. One of the men fighting Darius broke away, heading straight for Kaela. She picked up a rock, pathetic weapon, but all she had, and threw it, missed completely. The man kept coming. This was it. This was how she died. Not beaten to death by Margaret, but cut down by a stranger in a burning trading post, all because she'd thought she could escape her fate. The man raised his sword. Kaela raised her arms uselessly. Time seemed to stretch, each second lasting forever. Then Martha was there, interposing herself between Kaela and the blade. The sword meant for Kaela took Martha instead,
sliding between her ribs with a sound Kaela would hear in her nightmares forever. No! Kaela caught Martha as she fell, lowering her to the ground. Blood poured from the wound, hot and fast. Too much blood. No, no, no! Martha's hand found Kaela's face, surprisingly gentle. Not your fault, she gasped. Shaw chose to help you. His choice. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be alive. Martha's eyes were already starting to glaze. Tell him, debt's paid. She went still. Just like that. 1 second alive, the next gone. Kaela had seen death before, but never like this. Never someone dying for her. Something inside her broke. Or maybe it was something finally snapping into place. But the fear that had been driving her actions evaporated, replaced by cold, crystalline rage. The man who'd killed Martha was pulling his sword free, turning toward Kaela with that same casual brutality. She stood, Martha's blood still warm on her hands, and for once in her life, she didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. She just moved. Darius had taught her. Vulnerable spots. Eyes, throat, groin, knees. She went for the knee, stomping down with all her weight onto the side of his joint. Something popped. The man screamed and dropped, and Kaela grabbed his sword before he could recover. It was heavier than she expected, awkward in her hands, but she swung it anyway, wild and graceless, catching him across the shoulder. Not a killing blow, but enough to make him retreat. You little... She swung again. This time he blocked, steel meeting steel with a sound that rattled her teeth. He tried to rise, but his damaged knee wouldn't hold. She pressed the advantage, attacking in a flurry of desperate strikes that had no technique behind them, just raw survival instinct. One of her strikes got through, opened a gash across his face. He fell back, cursing, and Kaela stood over him with a sword she barely knew how to use and murder in her heart. Kaela, down! She dropped instinctively. Something whistled over her head. Darius's knife, end over end, burying itself in the throat of a man she hadn't seen coming up behind her. He fell gurgling, and then Darius was there, bleeding and exhausted, but still standing. We have to go, he said, grabbing her arm. Now. Martha. I know. I saw. His face was carved from stone. We honor her by surviving. Come on. He pulled her towards the main gate, which had been breached at some point during the fighting. Bodies lay thick there, guards and attackers both. The battle was winding down, not because anyone had won, but because there was almost no one left to fight. They were almost to the gate when Voss's brother appeared, blocking their path. He'd recovered from the mayor's impact, though he moved stiffly. Behind him, 3 more men emerged from the smoke. Shaw. Voss's brother had a cut across his temple, blood running down the side of his face. Finally, I was starting to think you'd run again. Darius pushed Kaela behind him. This is between us. Let the girl go. The girl is part of it now. She's yours, which means she dies too. Voss gestured and his men spread out, flanking. Nothing personal, sweetheart. Just business. Everything about this is personal, Darius said. His voice had gone flat, empty. The voice of a man with nothing left to lose. Your brother was a traitor. He murdered 200 men for political advancement. I gave him the death he deserved. He was family. Voss's hand tightened on his sword. And you destroyed him. So now I destroy everything you have. He moved. His men moved. And Darius moved to meet them. And Kaela realized with sudden clarity that he couldn't win this. Not 4 against 1. Not wounded and exhausted and running on nothing but will. She'd told him she wouldn't be dead weight. Had promised herself she'd learn to fight, to defend herself, to not be helpless. Time to prove it. She still had the sword she'd taken. Still had that cold rage burning in her chest. Martha was dead because of her. All these people were dead because she'd needed saving. She couldn't change that, couldn't bring them back, but she could make sure it meant something. Kaela stepped up beside Darius, sword raised despite her shaking hands. 2 on 4 is better odds. Kaela, I'm not asking permission. She met Voss's brother's eyes. And I'm done running. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Voss laughed, short and humorless. Brave. Stupid, but brave. He raised his sword. Kill them both. The fight that followed was nothing like the training sessions with Darius. It was chaos and terror and the absolute certainty of death. Kaela blocked more on luck than skill,
her arms going numb from the impacts. She couldn't match her opponent's strength, couldn't predict his movements. All she could do was survive 1 second, then the next, then the next. Beside her, Darius fought with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. But even he was flagging. A sword got through his guard, opening a cut across his arm. Another strike nearly took his head off. He was running out of time. They both were. Kaela's opponent drove her back, away from Darius, separating them. Smart. Divide and conquer. She tried to circle back, but another attacker blocked her path. She was surrounded now, alone, with nothing but a sword she barely knew how to use. "Any last words?" her opponent asked, raising his blade. Kaela thought about that. Thought about Margaret's face when she'd sold her. About her father's death. About Martha bleeding out in the dirt. About every moment of helplessness and fear that had defined her life. "Yeah," she said. "I'm done being a victim." She didn't wait for him to strike. Didn't wait for the killing blow. Instead, she attacked, throwing everything into one desperate lunge. It was terrible form. Darius would have yelled at her for it, but it was unexpected, and her opponent wasn't ready for someone to choose offense over defense. The sword punched through his guard, through his leather armor, into his stomach. He looked down at the blade, surprised. Kaela looked at it too, equally surprised. She'd actually done it, actually hurt him. Then he backhanded her across the face, and she went down hard, the sword torn from her grip. Stars exploded across her vision, blood filled her mouth. She tried to rise, but her body wouldn't respond. The man pulled her sword from his stomach, grimacing. "Bad move, girl." He raised the blade. Kaela couldn't move, couldn't dodge, could only watch death descend. Steel met steel inches from her face. Darius had gotten free somehow, crossed the distance, blocked the strike, but he was barely standing, blood pouring from multiple wounds. "Touch her again," Darius said, his voice like gravel, "and I'll make sure you die slow." Voss's brother stepped forward, sword raised. "You're in no position to make threats, Shaw." "Neither are you." Kaela didn't understand what he meant until she heard the horses. Dozens of them, thundering toward the compound. Reinforcements, she thought, more enemies. But the riders carried torches that illuminated faces she didn't recognize. And at their head rode a woman in armor that caught the firelight, turning her into something almost mythical. "Stand down!" the woman called, her voice carrying across the compound. "This fight is over!" Voss's brother's face went pale. "Commander Reeves." "Marcus Voss." The woman's expression was carved from ice. "You were told to let this go. Told that Shaw's case was closed, that pursuit would be considered insubordination." She gestured, and her soldiers moved to surround Voss and his remaining men. "You disobeyed a direct order." "He killed my brother." "Your brother was a traitor who got what he deserved." Shaw was cleared of wrongdoing and allowed to retire. Those were the terms. Commander Reeves dismounted, walking slowly toward Voss. "But you couldn't let it go. Had to seek revenge. And in doing so, you violated military law, destroyed a civilian settlement, and murdered innocent people. They were harboring—" "I don't care." Commander's voice went cold. "You and your men are under arrest. You'll be tried by military tribunal. If you resist, my soldiers have orders to execute you on the spot." For a moment, Kaela thought Voss would fight. Saw it in his eyes, the calculation of odds. But he was wounded, outnumbered, and facing a superior officer. Slowly, he lowered his sword. "This isn't over," he said to Darius. "Yes," Commander Reeves said, "it is." Her soldiers moved in, disarming Voss and his men, binding them with rough efficiency. The commander walked over to where Darius was barely staying upright, Kaela on the ground beside him. "Shaw, you look terrible." "Feeling worse." Darius's laugh turned into a cough that sprayed blood. "What took you so long?" "Had to wait for Voss to actually do something prosecutable. Hunting you quietly was one thing. This—" she gestured at the burning compound, the bodies. "This is something else entirely. Martha Kane is dead." The commander's expression flickered. "I'm sorry. She was a good woman." "She was." Darius finally let himself collapse, sinking down beside Kaela. "This is my wife, Kaela." Commander Reeves looked at Kaela with frank assessment. "You're the one who stabbed Corporal Richards?" Kaela blinked. Was that his name? The man she'd gutted? Yes." "Good."
He was a bastard. The commander extended a hand, helping Kaela to her feet. Can you ride? I don't know. You'll learn fast. We need to get you both out of here. Get those wounds treated before you bleed out. She whistled, and one of her soldiers brought over 2 horses. Shaw, think you can stay conscious long enough to make it to our camp? Do I have a choice? Not really. Getting Darius onto the horse took 3 soldiers and a lot of cursing. Getting Kaela up behind him was easier, though every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her battered body. She wrapped her arms around his waist, felt the slickness of blood under her hands. Stay with me, she whispered. Wasn't planning on going anywhere. His voice was weak but steady. You did good tonight. Stupid, reckless, but good. You're one to talk about reckless. Fair point. They rode out of the burning trading post, leaving behind the dead and the captured and everything that had happened there. Kaela looked back once, seeing Martha's body still lying where she'd fallen. A woman who'd died paying a debt, protecting strangers. I'll remember you, Kaela thought. I'll make this worth it. The ride to the military camp was a blur of pain and exhaustion. Kaela drifted in and out of consciousness, jerking awake each time Darius's weight shifted, terrified he was falling. But he stayed mounted, stayed breathing, stayed alive through sheer stubborn will. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the camp, an organized collection of tents with sentries posted and fires burning. Soldiers moved with purposeful efficiency, the kind that spoke of serious training and discipline. Medics descended on them immediately. Someone pulled Kaela off the horse, guided her to a tent. Someone else started cleaning her wounds, asking questions she couldn't focus enough to answer. Where was Darius? Was he alive? She tried to ask, but her voice wouldn't work. Easy, a medic said. You're safe now. Just rest. Rest sounded impossible, but exhaustion won out over fear and Kaela's eyes slid closed. Her last conscious thought was wondering if Darius had survived, and if he had, what happened next? They'd killed a man tonight, maybe more than one. Martha was dead. The trading post was destroyed, and they were still alive. Barely. When Kaela woke, it was full daylight, and her body felt like one massive bruise. She was in a tent, on a real cot with real blankets. Her wounds had been bandaged with professional care. Someone had even cleaned the blood from her hands, though she could still smell it. Would probably smell it forever. You're awake. She turned her head, the movement sending spikes of pain through her neck, and saw Commander Reeves sitting beside the cot. Up close, the woman was younger than Kaela had thought. Maybe 40, with gray threading through her dark hair and scars that spoke of experience. Darius? Kaela's voice came out as a croak. Alive, unconscious, but stable. Lost a lot of blood, but the medics say he'll survive. Reeves studied her. You want to tell me how a girl from Greystone ended up married to a former war leader? Kaela's laugh hurt. It's a long story. I've got time. So Kaela told her. Everything. Margaret's cruelty, the forced marriage, the escape into the wilderness, the training, the attack on the trading post. All of it spilled out in a rush, like poison being drawn from a wound. Reeves listened without interrupting. When Kaela finished, the commander sat back, expression thoughtful. You've had a hell of a week. That's one way to put it. Shaw saved you, bought your freedom, taught you to fight. Reeves's eyes were sharp. Question is, what are you going to do with it? I don't understand. You could go back to Greystone. Voss is arrested, his men are in custody. Shaw's name is cleared. I'll make sure of that officially. You're free to return to your old life. The suggestion made Kaela's stomach turn. Return to Margaret? To that house, that settlement, that life of slow suffocation? She'd rather die. Or, Reeves continued, you could keep moving forward, build something new. Shaw's going to need time to recover. After that, he'll need to decide what comes next. You could be part of that decision. I want to be. Even knowing what he is, what he's done, the enemies he's made? Kaela thought about that. Really thought about it. Darius had killed men, would probably kill more. He was dangerous and damaged and would bring nothing but hard choices and harder consequences. But he'd also given her freedom, had treated her like she mattered, had taught her to fight instead of accepting helplessness. Yes, she said. Even knowing all that, Reeves smiled slightly. Good, because I think he needs you as much as you need him. She stood. Rest, eat, heal. When you're both ready, we'll talk about what happens next." She left, and Kaela lay back on the cot. Through the tent opening, she could see soldiers moving about their business. Normal life continuing despite the chaos of the night before. Martha was dead. Kaela had killed a man. The trading post was destroyed. Everything had gone wrong in the worst possible ways. But they were alive. Both of them. And for the first time in her life, Kaela had fought back instead of just enduring. Had made choices instead of accepting what others decided for her. It wasn't freedom yet. Not really. But it was the beginning of it. And sometimes the beginning was enough. 3 days passed before Darius woke. 3 days of Kaela sitting beside his cot, watching his chest rise and fall, terrified each breath might be his last. The medics assured her he was healing, that the fever had broken, that he just needed time. But time felt like a luxury they didn't have. On the morning of the 4th day, his eyes opened. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Where else would I be?" "Anywhere. Somewhere safe." He tried to sit up, grimaced, thought better of it. "How bad?" "You lost a lot of blood, took 15 stitches across your ribs, 9 more on your arm. The medics say you'll recover, but you need rest." "How long have I been out?" 3 days. Darius closed his eyes. "Martha?" "Dead. I'm sorry." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick. "She deserved better than that. She died protecting me, said to tell you the debt was paid. It was paid the moment she didn't give me up to Voss's people." Darius's hand found Kaela's, his grip weak but steady. "You should have run when the fighting started. You promised to stay in the cabin." "I broke that promise." Kaela met his eyes. "And I'd break it again. I'm done hiding while other people fight my battles." "You killed someone." It wasn't a question. Kaela looked at her hands, remembering the resistance when her sword had punched through armor and flesh. "Yes. How do you feel about that?" She expected to feel guilty, expected nightmares and regret, and the weight of having taken a life. Instead, she felt nothing. Or not nothing exactly. Just a cold acceptance that it had been necessary. Him or her, and she'd chosen herself. "I feel like I did what I had to do." Darius studied her face. "That's going to bother you eventually. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday you'll wake up and it'll hit you. When it does, we'll deal with it. Together? If you want." "I want." Kaela squeezed his hand. "Commander Reeves said your name is being cleared, officially, that Voss and his men will be tried for their crimes. She tell you anything else? That we have choices now, that we can go back to civilian life, or..." She hesitated. She didn't finish that sentence. She wouldn't. Reeves is smart. Lets people come to their own conclusions. Darius shifted, trying to get comfortable. "The or she's implying is that I could rejoin the military. They'd take me back in a heartbeat, probably give me a command position. Former war leader returns from disgrace. That kind of story plays well." "Do you want that?" "I don't know what I want. For 5 years I've been focused on surviving, on staying hidden. Now that's over, and I have to actually think about living." He looked at her. "What about you? What do you want?" It was the second time someone had asked her that question. The second time she'd been given the space to consider her own desires, instead of just accepting what others decided for her. "I want to not be useless," Kaela said slowly. "I want to learn things, become capable. I want..." She struggled for words. "I spent my whole life being told I was worthless, being treated like a burden. I want to prove that wrong. To myself, if no one else." "You're not worthless. You proved that at the trading post." "I got lucky. If you hadn't been there, if Commander Reeves hadn't arrived, but I was there. And she did arrive. And you survived. That's what matters." Darius closed his eyes again, exhaustion pulling at him. "We'll figure it out, together, after I can stand without passing out." He drifted back to sleep, and Kaela sat there holding his hand, thinking about futures and possibilities. For the first time in her life, she had options. The question was what to do with them. Commander Reeves visited that afternoon, finding Kaela outside the medical tent, trying to stretch muscles that had gone stiff from too much sitting. "Shaw's awake, I hear. For a few minutes. He's sleeping again now." "Good. He needs it." Reeves gestured toward the camp's perimeter. "Walk with me."
I want to show you something. They walked through the camp, past soldiers training and cooking and maintaining equipment. Everyone moved with purpose, with discipline. It reminded Kaela of a hive, individual parts working toward a collective goal. You know what this is? Reeves asked. A military camp. It's order, structure, people working together towards something bigger than themselves. Reeves stopped at the edge of camp, looking out at the wilderness beyond. Shaw was good at this. One of the best commanders I ever served with. He understood that an army isn't about individuals. It's about building something that's stronger than the sum of its parts. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm trying to recruit you both. Reeves turned to face her. Shaw's proven himself. He has skills, experience, leadership ability, but he's also damaged, haunted by what happened to his men. He needs something to anchor him, give him purpose beyond just survival. And you think that something is me? I think you could be part of it. Reeves crossed her arms. You're not trained. You're rough around the edges and you make reckless decisions. But you have potential. You stood your ground against trained soldiers with almost no experience. That's either insane or impressive. Possibly both. Kaela didn't know what to say to that. I'm offering you a place here, Reeves continued. Both of you. Shaw can have his command back if he wants it. You can train, become a soldier in your own right. You'll have structure, purpose, a community, and protection. No one's going to come after you here. What if we say no? Then you're free to leave. I meant what I said about choices, but I think you should consider this carefully, because the alternative is going back to nothing. No home, no resources, just two people wandering the wilderness hoping things work out. Reeves was right, and Kaela knew it, but something in her resisted the idea of just slotting into someone else's structure. She'd spent her whole life being told where to go and what to do. The idea of choosing military discipline felt too much like accepting another cage, even if this one was better than the last. I need to talk to Darius. Of course, take your time, but not too much time. Winter's coming, and decisions need to be made before the passes close. Reeves started to walk away, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you'd both do well here. Shaw needs to stop running, and you need to figure out who you are when you're not just surviving. That night, Kaela lay in her own tent, small but private, another luxury she'd never had, and thought about Commander Reeves's offer. Join the military. Become a soldier. Learn to fight properly, to be useful, to have value beyond just existing. It was tempting, terrifyingly tempting. But was it what she wanted, or just another way of letting someone else define her? She was still thinking about it when she heard shouting from outside. Not alarm exactly, more like surprise. She pulled on her boots and emerged to find soldiers gathering near the camp's main entrance. A group of travelers had arrived. Refugees from the look of them, ragged, exhausted, carrying everything they owned. There were maybe 20 of them, mostly women and children. And at the front, looking both defiant and desperate, was someone Kaela recognized. Caroline, her stepsister. Kaela's stomach dropped. What was she doing here? How had she even found this place? Commander Reeves was already there, questioning the group's leader, an older woman with a baby on her hip and determination written across her face. Burned Greystone 3 days ago, the woman was saying. Bandits. They hit us at dawn, took everything that wasn't nailed down, killed anyone who resisted. How many casualties? Reeves asked. 15 dead, another dozen wounded. These are the ones who could travel. The woman's voice cracked. We've been walking since it happened. Someone said there was a military camp north of the old trading post. We're hoping... You can stay, Reeves said immediately. We'll get you food, medical attention, but I need to know, is anyone following you? We don't think so. They took what they wanted and moved on. Reeves started organizing, assigning soldiers to help the refugees, setting up temporary shelter. In the chaos, Caroline spotted Kaela. Their eyes met across the camp, and Caroline's expression went through several rapid changes. Shock, relief, anger, fear. She pushed through the crowd, stopping a few feet away. You're alive. So are you. Mother's not. Caroline's voice was flat. The bandits killed her, Beatrice too. They died in the first wave defending the house. Kaela waited for the surge of emotion. Grief, vindication, something. Instead, she felt nothing. Margaret was dead. The woman who'd made her life hell for 3 years, who'd beaten her and sold her like livestock. Dead. I'm sorry, Kaela said, because that seemed like what you were supposed to say. Are you? Caroline's laugh was bitter. You ran away. Married that beggar and disappeared. Mother said good riddance, but I think it drove her crazy. The fact that you got out. Is that why you're here? To tell me she's dead? I'm here because we had nowhere else to go. Caroline looked around the camp, taking in the soldiers, the organization, the sense of security. This is what you ran to? The military? It's where I ended up, not where I intended. And the beggar? Darius Shaw? I heard soldiers talking, said he was some kind of war hero. That true? It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. Caroline's anger seemed to drain away, leaving only exhaustion. I hated you. Growing up, I hated you so much. Mother made us compete for everything, her attention, her approval, and you always seemed to get it without trying. I got beaten, daily. You call that approval? You were still Father's daughter, his real daughter. Beatrice and I were just additions, replacements. Caroline's eyes were red but dry, like she'd cried herself out days ago. When the bandits came, Mother told us to hide, but Beatrice ran out to help her. I grabbed her, tried to pull her back, but she fought me. Said she had to prove she was worthy. She died trying to earn something she was never going to get. The story hit harder than Kaela expected. She'd spent 3 years thinking of her stepsisters as carbon copies of Margaret, cruel, petty, complicit in her suffering. It had never occurred to her that they might have been suffering too. Different suffering, but suffering nonetheless. I'm sorry about Beatrice, Kaela said, and this time she meant it. Caroline nodded slowly. What happens now? To us, I mean. The refugees. I don't know. Commander Reeves will figure something out. She's good at that. And you? What are you doing here? Kaela almost said she didn't know. But that felt like a cop-out, like retreating back into the passivity that had defined her for so long. I'm learning, she said instead, how to fight, how to survive, how to be something other than a victim. Must be nice, having that option. The words stung, probably because they were true. Kaela had gotten lucky, married a man who turned out to be capable, connected, willing to teach her. Caroline had gotten her mother and sister murdered, and was now a refugee dependent on military charity. You could learn too, Kaela heard herself say. If you wanted. Learn what? To be a soldier? To be capable? To not need someone else to protect you? Kaela gestured at the camp. They're going to feed you, house you. But eventually you'll need to contribute something. Might as well learn skills that keep you alive. Caroline looked at her like she'd grown a second head. You're serious. Why wouldn't I be? Because a week ago you were nothing. A servant in your own house. Now you're acting like you have answers. I don't have answers. I just know that waiting for someone to save me didn't work. Taking action did. Kaela turned to leave. Do what you want, but if you decide you want to learn, let me know. I'll help if I can. She walked away before Caroline could respond, heading back toward the medical tent. Darius was awake again, sitting up carefully, looking like death, but at least conscious. Heard we have refugees, he said. Greystone was raided. Bandits. Your stepsister's among the survivors. Darius raised an eyebrow. That must have been a fun reunion. It was weird. Kaela sat on the edge of his cot. Margaret's dead. So is Beatrice. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Empty? I thought I'd feel something. Relief or grief or vindication. Instead, I just feel nothing. She looked at her hands. Does that make me a terrible person? Makes you human. You don't owe grief to people who made you suffer. Darius shifted, grimacing. Commander Reeves talked to you yet? About her offer? She did. What do you think? I think it's safe, structured, everything we're supposed to want. But I'm not sure either of us do well with other people making decisions for us. He met her eyes. I've been thinking about what happens next, when I'm healed, when we can actually move again. And? There's territory north of here, unclaimed land beyond the military's jurisdiction, dangerous but resource-rich, good defensive positions in the mountains. He paused. We could build something there, not a settlement exactly, more like a stronghold, a place for people who don't fit anywhere else. Kayla's heart started beating faster. You mean like the refugees? Them? Others? People running from bad situations or bad pasts, military deserters, criminals who aren't actually dangerous, anyone who needs a fresh start and is willing to work for it. The more Darius talked, the more animated he became. It would be hard, brutal, especially at first, but it would be ours, built on our terms, with our rules. It was insane. Building a settlement from nothing in hostile territory with winter approaching, they'd probably die before they got it off the ground. But the idea took root in Kaela's mind and wouldn't let go. A place where survival wasn't about pleasing someone else or fitting into their structure. A place where effort mattered more than status. Commander Reeves wouldn't approve, Kaela said. No, she wouldn't. She'd call it reckless and stupid and a waste of potential. She'd be right, probably. Darius smiled. So, what do you think? Kaela thought about Margaret's house, where every day had been a fight for scraps of dignity. Thought about Greystone, where people had watched her suffer and done nothing. Thought about Commander Reeves's offer, safe, structured, and ultimately just another way of fitting into someone else's vision. I think, Kaela said slowly, that I'm tired of accepting what other people offer me. Tired of choosing between bad options and slightly less bad options. If we're going to build something, I want it to be ours, even if it kills us trying. Darius's smile widened. Then we have a plan. We have the bones of a plan. The details are going to be a nightmare. Details always are. They spent the next hour sketching out ideas. They'd need supplies, tools, weapons, preserved food, cold weather gear. They'd need people willing to work. They'd need security against bandits and predators. They'd need shelter built before winter hit hard. It was an impossible list, but it was their impossible list. When Commander Reeves visited that evening, they told her their decision. Her expression went through several stages: surprise, disapproval, resignation. You're both idiots, she said finally. Probably, Darius agreed. You'll die out there. Starvation, exposure, bandits. Take your pick. Maybe, but at least we'll die free. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. I can't stop you. Won't even try. But I can make sure you're not going out there empty-handed. She started listing supplies: surplus military equipment, cold weather gear, weapons, food stores. More than Kaela had dared hope for. Considerate payment for services rendered, and maybe insurance that you don't die immediately and make me look bad. Thank you, Kaela said. Don't thank me, just survive. Build something worth the effort. Reeves looked at them both. And if it all goes wrong, if you need help, you know where to find me. Word spread through the camp quickly. Shaw and his wife were leaving to build a settlement. Reactions ranged from skeptical to admiring to openly mocking. Most thought they'd be dead within a month. But some people listened, asked questions, wanted details. Caroline was one of them. You were serious, she said, finding Kaela the next morning. About learning. About doing something. I was. Then I want in, on whatever you're building. Caroline's jaw was set with determination. I'm tired of being useless. Tired of depending on other people's charity. If you're offering another option, I'll take it. Kaela studied her stepsister. 3 years ago, Caroline had watched her get beaten without intervening, had participated in her humiliation. Forgiving that felt impossible. But Caroline had also lost everything. Was standing here asking for a chance instead of just accepting whatever scraps were offered. That took its own kind of courage. It's going to be brutal, Kaela warned. Physical labor, learning to fight, to hunt, to survive. No guarantees of success. Still better than waiting here for someone to decide my fate. All right, you're in. Kaela held out her hand. Caroline stared at it for a moment, then shook. Her grip was surprisingly strong. But if you slow us down, if you complain, if you expect special treatment because we're family, you're out. We're not family, not really. Caroline's voice was matter-of-fact. But maybe we can be something else, partners, colleagues, whatever you call people building something together. Others joined over the next few days. 3 women from the refugee group. A young soldier named Marcus who'd been disciplined for insubordination and saw this as a better option than discharge. An older man called Webb who'd been a carpenter before the wars and was sick of military structure. A teenage girl named Sarah whose parents had died in Greystone's raid and who had no other options. 9 people total. Not an army. Barely a work crew. But it was a start. Darius recovered enough to stand, to walk short distances without collapsing. The medics cleared him for travel with strict instructions about wound care and limitations. He ignored most of them. "You're supposed to rest," Kaela said, watching him practice sword forms with painful slowness. "I'll rest when I'm dead. Right now, I need to make sure my body remembers how to move." He finished a sequence, breathing hard. "Besides, you're not resting either. Saw you training with Marcus yesterday." "That's different." "How?" "Because I wasn't half dead 3 days ago." "Fair point." Darius lowered his sword. "Ready for this?" "Really ready. Once we leave, there's no going back." Kaela thought about that question, thought about Margaret's house and Greystone and every moment of powerlessness that had defined her first 18 years. Thought about the last week, the terror and the violence and the discovery that she could fight back. "I'm ready," she said. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." They left on a cold morning 2 weeks after the trading post attack. Commander Reeves provided horses, pack animals loaded with supplies, and a detailed map of the unclaimed territories. She also provided advice, most of it pessimistic. "The pass you're aiming for closes by mid-November. If you're not through by then, you're stuck on this side until spring." "We'll make it," Darius said. "The territory you're claiming is technically free but practically dangerous. Bandits use it as a hideout. Wildlife is aggressive, and there are rumors of worse things in the deep mountains. We'll handle it. You're going to die out there." "Probably, but it'll be on our terms." Reeves shook her head, but she was smiling slightly. "You're both insane, but I respect the commitment." She turned to Kaela. "Take care of him. Don't let him do anything too stupid." "I'll try. And Kaela?" Reeves's expression turned serious. "You've come a long way in 2 weeks. Don't stop now. Keep pushing. Keep learning. You've got potential. Make sure you use it." The words settled into Kaela's chest, warm and solid. Potential. Someone saw potential in her, someone who wasn't selling her or using her or trying to beat her into submission. They rode out with their small group, 9 people heading into uncertain territory with impossible goals. Behind them, soldiers watched from the camp perimeter. Some looked skeptical. Others looked envious. Caroline rode beside Kaela, sitting uncomfortably in the saddle but determined. "What if this doesn't work? Then we'll have tried." "That's not much of a plan. It's better than accepting what other people decide for us." Kaela looked ahead, where Darius was leading them toward the northern pass. "We spent our whole lives being told what we were worth, what we could do, where we belonged. Maybe it's time we decided that for ourselves. Even if we fail? Especially if we fail. At least then it's our failure, our choice." They rode for 3 days, following the map Commander Reeves had provided. The terrain grew rougher, forests giving way to rocky foothills. Game was scarce. Water sources were unreliable. Everyone was cold, tired, and starting to question their decisions. On the 4th day, they reached the pass. It was a narrow cut through the mountains, barely wide enough for their horses, with sheer drops on either side that made Kaela's stomach churn. But on the other side, Darius promised, was a valley, protected, defensible, rich with resources if you knew where to look. "This is it," Darius announced, stopping at the pass entrance. "Last chance to turn back. No judgment if you do. But once we go through, we're committed." No one moved. Everyone just sat there on their horses, looking at the narrow passage, calculating odds. Then Sarah, the teenage girl who'd lost her parents, spoke up. "I didn't come this far to quit now." Marcus nodded. "Same." One by one, the others agreed. Even Caroline, who looked terrified but determined. They were committed, all of them. "Then let's go," Darius said, and urged his horse forward into the pass. The journey through took hours. The horses balked at the narrow path. Loose stones cascaded down from above, forcing them to stop and wait. At one point, a rockslide blocked their path completely, and they had to spend an hour clearing it by hand. But eventually, they emerged on the other side, and the valley spread out before them. It was smaller than Kaela had imagined, but more beautiful. Trees thick with late autumn color. A river cutting through the center, fed by mountain streams. Meadows that would be lush in spring. Rocky outcroppings that could serve as natural fortifications. And in the distance, the mountains rose like guardians, protecting this hidden place from the rest of the world. "Home," Darius said quietly. Kaela looked at the valley, at their small group, at the impossible task ahead of them. They had maybe 6 weeks before winter hit hard. 6 weeks to build shelter, gather food, establish security. 6 weeks to create something from nothing. It was insane. Impossible. Exactly the kind of challenge that should make any reasonable person turn around. But Kaela had spent 3 years being reasonable, being cautious, being small and quiet and unobtrusive. It hadn't saved her, hadn't protected her, hadn't done anything except make her miserable. "Where do we start?" she asked. Darius smiled. "Wherever we want. That's the point." They made camp that first night in the shelter of some large boulders near the river. No real shelter yet, just tents and fire. But it was theirs, their choice, their beginning. Over dinner, dried meat and hard bread, nothing special, Darius laid out his vision. Not orders or commands, but ideas they could all contribute to. A main hall for shared space, individual cabins for privacy, a perimeter wall, watchtowers, gardens, storage for food and supplies, a forge if Webb could build one, training grounds. "It sounds like a lot," Webb observed. "It is. We won't get it all done before winter, but we can get enough to survive. The rest comes after." "What do we call it?" Sarah asked. "The settlement. Does it have a name?" Everyone looked at each other. A name felt important, official, like claiming this place as their own. Darius looked at Kaela. "You choose." "Me? You're the reason we're here. You decided you wanted something different, something you built yourself. You should name it." Kaela thought about Margaret's house, where her name had been a curse, about Greystone, where she'd been invisible, about this valley, where they would build something new from blood and sweat and sheer stubborn determination. "Thornhaven," she said. The word felt right. Because we're all thorns, things other places didn't want. But here, we're building a haven. Darius smiled. "Thornhaven it is." They raised their cups, filled with water, not wine, because they were practical, in a toast. To Thornhaven, to new beginnings, to the insane idea that outcasts and refugees could build something worth having. That night, Kaela lay in her tent listening to the river and thinking about everything that had led here. A month ago, she'd been a servant in Margaret's house, beaten and broken, sold to a beggar as a solution to debt. Now she was here, in a valley she'd helped choose, building something she'd helped plan, with people who'd chosen to follow, not because they were ordered, but because the alternative was worse. It wasn't freedom yet, not complete freedom, but it was closer than she'd ever been. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. The real work began with axes and saws and muscles that screamed in protest. Kaela had thought she knew what hard labor meant. 3 years with Margaret had taught her plenty about exhaustion. But this was different. This was choosing the pain, working towards something instead of just enduring. They started with this main hall because winter was coming and they needed shelter that could house everyone when the cold hit hard. Darius and Webb marked out the foundation while the rest of them felled trees. Kaela's hands blistered within the first hour, bled by the second, calloused by the end of the first week. "You're getting better at that," Caroline said one afternoon, watching Kaela bring down a mid-sized pine with surprising efficiency. "Had good motivation to learn." Kaela wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. "How's your section coming?" "Slower than yours, but I'm getting there." Caroline's hands were as damaged as Kaela's, wrapped in cloth to protect the worst of the blisters. "Never thought I'd be doing this, cutting down trees, building things. Never thought I'd be married to a war leader and starting a settlement in hostile territory. Life's full of surprises." They worked from dawn until dark couldn't be ignored anymore, then worked by firelight when tasks allowed. Webb turned out to be worth his weight in gold. He knew timber, knew construction, knew how to make things that would stand against wind and snow and time. Under his direction, the main hall took shape faster than anyone had expected, but not fast enough. Winter was closing in, and they could feel it in the air. The temperature dropped daily. Morning frost lasted longer. The river's edges started to ice over at night. 3 weeks in, Marcus spotted riders approaching from the pass. 5 of them, armed and watchful. Bandits, Kaela's first thought. But Darius studied them through his scope and shook his head. Military, Commander Reeves's people, from their uniforms. They rode out to meet the group at the valley entrance. The lead rider was a woman Kaela recognized from the camp, Captain Torres, one of Reeves's senior officers. "Shaw," Torres said by way of greeting. "Commander sent us to check on you. Make sure you hadn't all died yet." "Still alive, barely," Darius gestured at the valley. "As you can see, we're making progress." Torres looked at the half-built hall, the cleared land, the organized chaos of their camp. Something like approval crossed her face. "Better than expected. Reeves thought you'd be dead or gone by now." "We're stubborn." "Clearly." Torres dismounted, her 4 soldiers following suit. "We brought additional supplies. Cold weather gear, medical supplies, seeds for spring planting. Consider it an investment." "Investment in what?" "In not having you die and making the commander look bad for letting you leave." Torres smiled slightly. "Also, she thinks you might actually pull this off. And if you do, having an allied settlement this far north could be strategically valuable." They unloaded the supplies, far more than Kaela had dared hope for. Proper winter clothing, medicine, tools they desperately needed, and seeds carefully preserved, representing the possibility of spring. "There's something else," Torres said, pulling Darius aside. Kaela moved closer, not bothering to hide her interest. Torres noticed and didn't object. "Word spreading about what you're doing here, about a place for people who don't fit elsewhere. You're going to start getting visitors, some good, some not so good." "We can handle it," Darius said. "Can you?" "You've got 9 people, Shaw. 9. That's not a settlement. That's barely a work crew." Torres's expression was serious. "I'm not trying to discourage you, just warning you. Success attracts attention, and not all of it will be friendly. So what are you suggesting? Be selective. Screen people before you let them join, and maybe accept that you're going to need more help than you think." Torres glanced at her soldiers. "I can spare 2 people, temporarily. They'll help with construction and provide extra security. When spring comes, we'll reassess." Darius looked at Kaela. She nodded. 2 more hands would make a massive difference. "We accept," Darius said. "And thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you survive winter." Torres and her remaining soldiers left the next morning. The 2 who stayed, a young woman named Kira and an older man called Stone, integrated quickly. Both were skilled fighters, experienced in wilderness survival, and didn't complain about the brutal work schedule. With 11 people working, the main hall came together faster. They raised the walls, fitted the roof, built a stone fireplace that Webb swore would heat the entire space. It wasn't beautiful, wasn't even particularly comfortable, but it was solid and it would keep them alive when the storms came. The day they finished, 2 months almost to the day since leaving Commander Reeves's camp, they stood back and looked at what they'd built. The structure was rough but sturdy, with space enough for everyone to sleep and eat and survive the worst of winter. "We did it," Sarah said, and there was wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." "We did the first part," Darius corrected. "Now comes the hard part, actually surviving." He was right. Building the hall had been the easy challenge compared to what came next. Food was scarce. Hunting was difficult in the increasing cold, and their preserved supplies would only stretch so far. Water access meant breaking ice daily. Firewood required constant gathering. Every day was a battle against elements that didn't care about their determination or their dreams. And then Margaret arrived. Not literally. She was dead, buried in Greystone's destroyed settlement. But her shadow arrived in the form of 4 refugees from that raid, people who'd known Kaela before, people who remembered what she'd been. They appeared at the valley entrance on a bitter cold morning, led by Thomas Garrett, the deputy who'd taunted Kaela about her forced marriage, who'd watched her suffer and done nothing. "Well," Thomas said, looking around the valley, "heard rumors about this place. Didn't believe them until now." Kaela stood at the entrance with Darius and Marcus, hand on the knife she now carried everywhere. "What do you want, Thomas?" "Sanctuary, same as everyone else." He gestured at his companions, 2 men and a woman, all looking exhausted and desperate. "Greystone's gone. Everything's gone. We need somewhere to survive winter. And you chose here. Heard you were taking in refugees, people who needed a fresh start." Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's us. Fresh start. Clean slate." Darius looked at Kaela, a silent question. "Your call." Kaela studied the 4 newcomers.
Thomas had never personally beaten her, but he'd enabled it, had laughed about her situation, had represented everything wrong with Greystone, the casual cruelty, the acceptance of suffering, the indifference to injustice.
But he was also human, desperate, and they'd built Thornhaven for people like this, outcasts, people running from bad situations. "You can stay," Kaela said finally. "But there are rules. Everyone works. Everyone contributes. And past status means nothing here. You're not a deputy anymore, Thomas. You're just another person trying to survive." Thomas's smile tightened. Understood. They integrated the newcomers into the work schedule. Thomas proved surprisingly capable with construction. His companions worked hard enough, though they complained constantly about the cold and the labor and the basic conditions. But tensions simmered. Thomas had a way of making comments. Nothing overtly hostile, just small jabs wrapped in humor. Mentioning Kaela's past, reminding people she'd been nothing in Greystone, suggesting maybe she wasn't qualified to be making decisions about who stayed and who went. Caroline confronted him after a week. "Shut up about my stepsister." "Your stepsister? Thought you hated her." "That was before. This is now." Caroline stepped closer, and despite being smaller than Thomas, she somehow made him take a step back. "She's building something here. We all are. You want to stay? You respect that. Otherwise, you can leave." Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation. Make different conversation." The incident should have ended there, but Thomas had a talent for finding cracks and widening them. He questioned decisions, undermined authority subtly, started forming a small faction of malcontents who thought things should be run differently. It came to a head 2 weeks later during a community meeting to discuss food rationing. Supplies were lower than expected and tough choices needed to be made. Darius laid out the options: reduce everyone's portions or send a hunting party into dangerous territory to supplement their stores. Or, Thomas said, we could reconsider who gets to eat. The room went silent. "Explain that," Darius said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm just saying we've got limited resources. Maybe we should prioritize people who contribute more, people who are essential versus people who are less essential." "You mean me?" Sarah said. She was 16, small, still learning most skills. "You think I shouldn't eat because I'm not as useful as you." "I didn't say that." "You did, just with prettier words." Kaela stood and everyone's attention shifted to her. "That's not how we operate here. Everyone contributes what they can. Everyone gets fed. That's the deal." "That's a stupid deal if it means we all starve," Thomas shot back. "Someone needs to make hard choices, real choices. Not this everyone's equal fantasy you're pushing." "Then leave." The words came out cold and final. "If you don't like how we do things, you're free to go. We won't stop you." Thomas looked around the room, clearly expecting support. Found none. Even his small faction was silent, unwilling to back him when it came to actually challenging authority. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Probably. But it's our mistake to make." Kaela held his gaze. "So what's it going to be? Accept the rules or leave?" For a moment she thought he'd fight, saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of odds. But Thomas was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He was outnumbered, and even his allies weren't committed enough to follow him into conflict. "I'll stay," he said finally. "For now. Then sit down and stop disrupting the meeting." He sat, anger radiating from him in waves. But he sat, and Kaela realized something important. She wasn't scared of him. Wasn't scared of his disapproval or his potential violence or anything else he represented. He was just a man, a bitter, petty man with no power over her anymore. The meeting continued. They decided on the hunting party. Marcus, Stone, and Webb would go, with Kira staying behind for security. It was risky, but starvation was a certainty if they didn't supplement their stores. They left at dawn, and Kaela watched them go with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. 3 of their 11 people heading into dangerous territory in the dead of winter. If something went wrong, if they didn't come back. "They'll be fine," Darius said, coming up beside her. "Marcus and Stone know what they're doing, and Webb survived worse than a hunting trip." "That doesn't stop me from worrying." "No, it doesn't." He put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become comfortable over the past months. "But worry is what keeps us careful,
keeps us from getting complacent. They returned 3 days later, triumphant. 2 deer and an elk, enough meat to see them through the worst of winter if they were careful. The whole settlement celebrated that night. A real meal, hot and filling, with everyone together in the main hall they'd built with their own hands. To Marcus and Stone and Webb, Darius said, raising his cup, and to survival. To Thornhaven, Caroline added, and to never going back to what we were. They drank, and for the first time since arriving in the valley, Kaela felt something like hope. They were going to make it, actually make it through winter and into spring and beyond. But winter wasn't done with them yet. The storm hit 2 weeks later, a blizzard that buried the valley in snow and trapped them all inside the main hall for 5 days. The wind howled like a living thing. The temperature dropped so low that water froze within minutes of being brought inside. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and people started to panic. On the 3rd day, Thomas made his move. "We need to ration the firewood," he announced. "We're going through it too fast. At this rate, we'll freeze before the storm ends." "We're already rationing," Darius said. "Everyone gets equal shares." "That's the problem. Equal shares mean we all freeze. What we need is to prioritize essential personnel, keep them warm so they can function when this is over." "Here we go again," Caroline muttered. "I'm serious. This isn't about fairness. It's about survival." Thomas looked around the hall. The strong need to survive to protect the weak. That's just logic. "That's eugenics," Kira said flatly, "and we're not doing it." "Then you're condemning us all to death." "No," Kaela said, standing up. "You're using a crisis to push an agenda you've been pushing since you got here. The answer is still no. We share resources equally, or we don't share them at all." Thomas's expression hardened. "You're not qualified to make that decision." "Actually, I am. I helped build this place. I helped establish the rules. And more importantly, everyone here agreed to those rules when they joined." Kaela moved closer. "You don't like it? There's the door. Storm or no storm, you're free to leave." "You'd throw me out in a blizzard?" "I'd let you choose to leave if you can't accept how things work here." Big difference. They stared at each other across the hall, and everyone else went silent. This was it. The moment that would define what Thornhaven actually was. A democracy or a dictatorship. A community or a hierarchy. "I'm not leaving," Thomas said, "and neither are you. Because we both know you need me, need everyone. You can't afford to start throwing people out. Watch me." Kaela turned to address everyone else. "Anyone who can't accept equal treatment, equal resources, equal voice in decisions, leave now. We'll survive without you. We might not survive with you." No one moved. Even Thomas's previous allies stayed silent, unwilling to follow him into exile. Thomas laughed, but it sounded forced. "Fine. Have it your way. But when we're all freezing because we ran out of wood, remember I warned you." "I'll remember," Kaela promised. "Now sit down and shut up." He sat. And in that moment, something shifted. Kaela had stood up to him, really stood up to him, and he'd backed down. She wasn't Margaret's stepdaughter anymore, wasn't the servant or the victim or the girl being sold to settle debts. She was Kaela Shaw, co-founder of Thornhaven, and she had power here. The storm finally broke on the 6th day. They'd made it through with minimal firewood to spare, vindicating Kaela's decision to maintain equal shares. Thomas didn't apologize, but he stopped undermining decisions openly, started actually contributing instead of just complaining. Progress. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't trust that winter was really done. But the snow melted, the ice broke, the river swelled with runoff, and green things started pushing through the dead earth, reaching for sunlight. They planted the seeds Commander Reeves had provided, built additional cabins so people could have private space, expanded the perimeter fence, established regular patrol routes, developed systems for everything from water collection to waste disposal to conflict resolution. And people kept coming. A family fleeing debt collectors, a pair of military deserters who'd refused an unjust order, a woman escaping an abusive marriage, an elderly scholar who'd been exiled from his community for heretical ideas. One by one, 2 by 2, they arrived at the valley entrance with nothing but what they could carry and desperate hope in their eyes. By late spring, Thornhaven had 32 residents. By summer, 50. Each one carefully screened, each one agreeing to the rules, each one contributing to the growing community. Kaela found herself in a leadership role she'd never sought but couldn't avoid.
People came to her with problems, with ideas, with disputes that needed mediating. She and Darius made decisions together, but increasingly people deferred to her judgment on social issues, on questions of fairness and inclusion. "You're good at this," Darius said one evening, watching her resolve a dispute between two families over cabin placement. "I hate it, all the talking and the mediating and the endless questions. But you're good at it. People trust you. They see you as fair. They see me as someone who won't throw them away for being inconvenient." Kaela looked at their growing settlement, cabins scattered across the valley, fields planted and growing, people working together toward shared goals. That's not the same as being good at leadership. It's exactly what being good at leadership means. Maybe he was right. Kaela didn't know. But she kept doing it, kept listening and mediating and making decisions, because someone had to, and she seemed to be less terrible at it than most people. The first real test came in late summer, when Thomas finally made his move. He'd been gathering support quietly, carefully, building a faction that thought Thornhaven should be run more efficiently, more hierarchically, with clear leaders and clear followers. His arguments were persuasive to people tired of endless community meetings and democratic decision-making. The confrontation came during a gathering to discuss winter preparations. Thomas stood up and addressed the crowd. "We need to talk about leadership, about how decisions get made around here. We're democratic," Darius said. "Everyone gets a voice. And that's the problem. Democracy is slow, inefficient. We spend hours debating things that should take minutes to decide." Thomas looked around, making eye contact with his supporters. "What we need is clear leadership. A council, maybe. People who've proven themselves, who can make decisions quickly when needed." "A council sounds reasonable," someone said. "It does," Kaela agreed, surprising everyone. "So let's vote on it, right now. Everyone in favor of establishing a leadership council, raise your hand." About half the hands went up. Not a majority, but close. Closer than Kaela had expected. "And everyone opposed?" The other half raised their hands. "Looks like we're divided," Kaela said. "Which means we need more discussion, more debate, until we reach something closer to consensus." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Or we could just decide. Let the people who built this place make the call." "The people who built this place are everyone here. We all contributed. We all get a say." Kaela stood, facing him directly. "What you want is power, Thomas. Power to make decisions without accountability. That's not happening. What I want is efficiency. What you want is to recreate the hierarchy you lost when Greystone burned, where some people matter more than others, where your voice counts and others don't." Kaela's voice rang across the gathering. "That's what you've always wanted. That's why you couldn't handle equal treatment, because equality offends you. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You've been pushing for this since you arrived, trying to create tiers, categories, essential versus non-essential people. And I'm done pretending that's about efficiency." Kaela turned to address everyone else. Thornhaven was built on the idea that everyone matters, that past status doesn't define current worth, that contribution, not position, earns respect. If we abandon that, we're just recreating what we ran from. Silence. Then Caroline stood. "I agree with Kaela. We stay democratic." Sarah stood. "Same." One by one, others rose. Not everyone. Thomas's faction remained seated, expressions stubborn, but enough stood that the message was clear. Thornhaven would remain what it was, flawed, inefficient, frustratingly slow, but equal. Thomas looked at his remaining supporters, did the math, and stood abruptly. "Fine. You want to run things by committee, waste time on endless debates. That's your choice. But don't come crying to me when everything falls apart." He left the gathering, his faction trailing behind him. For a moment, Kaela thought they'd leave entirely, walk out of the valley, and not come back. Part of her hoped for it. But they didn't leave, just retreated to their own cabins, nursing resentment and plotting their next move. "That's going to be a problem," Darius said later in the cabin they now shared. "I know, but what was I supposed to do? Let him take over?" "No, you did the right thing. I'm just saying, he's not going to give up." Darius was right. Thomas and his faction, about 12 people, became a constant thorn. They did their assigned work, but nothing extra. Complained loudly about decisions. Boycotted community events. Created a pocket of negativity in an otherwise functional community. It finally came to a head when winter approached again. During a meeting about preparations, Thomas stood and made an announcement. We're leaving, starting our own settlement across the valley, taking our share of resources and building something better, more efficient, more organized. The room erupted in argument. Darius called for order, barely got it. If you want to leave, leave, Kaela said. But you don't get to take resources. Those belong to the community. You came here with nothing. You leave with nothing. We worked for those resources and used them while you were here. Food you ate, shelter you slept in, tools you used. You don't get to claim them retroactively just because you're leaving. Thomas's face went red. You're stealing from us. I'm protecting the community. The resources stay. You go if you want, but you go with what you brought. Nothing. For a moment, she thought he'd actually attack her. Saw the violence in his eyes, the calculation of whether he could take her, take Darius, take control by force. But Kira and Marcus had moved to flank them, hands on weapons. And Thomas was many things, but he wasn't suicidal. You'll regret this, he said. Probably. But it won't be because I let you steal from people who trusted me. Thomas and his faction left the next day, heading across the valley with nothing but what they'd brought originally. Kaela watched them go and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that the constant conflict was over, anxiety about what they'd do next, and a strange sadness that it had come to this. They won't make it, Caroline said, standing beside her. 12 people, no supplies, winter coming. They'll be begging to return within a month. Maybe. Or maybe they'll surprise us. You're too generous. I'm realistic. Thomas is capable when he wants to be. His people aren't stupid. They might actually build something. And if they do? If they create a rival settlement right across the valley? Kaela shrugged. Then we deal with it. Together, like we deal with everything else. Thomas's faction did build something. A crude camp on the far side of the valley. It didn't thrive, but it survived. They traded occasionally with Thornhaven, tense exchanges of goods and information, an uneasy coexistence rather than cooperation. But Thornhaven itself grew stronger. They refined their systems, built more cabins, expanded their fields, developed specializations. Some people focused on farming, others on hunting, others on crafts and construction. What had started as 9 desperate people had become a functioning community of nearly 60. Word continued to spread. By the second spring, they had people arriving from settlements 3 weeks' travel away. Former soldiers, escaped slaves, religious dissidents. People running from bad marriages, bad debts, bad pasts. All of them seeking the same thing, a place where your past didn't define your future. Commander Reeves visited in late spring, bringing supplies and assessing their progress. She walked through the expanded settlement with visible amazement. You've built something real here, she said to Kaela and Darius. I didn't think you'd make it through the first winter. Now look at this. We got lucky, Darius said. Luck had nothing to do with it. You built something people wanted, needed, a place where everyone matters, not just the strong or the wealthy or the well-connected. Reeves looked at Kaela. You especially. What you've created here, it's revolutionary, whether you realize it or not. It's just people trying to survive. It's people choosing how to survive, choosing fairness over efficiency, community over hierarchy. That's rare, special. Reeves paused. The military wants to establish formal relations, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, make Thornhaven an official ally. Kaela and Darius exchanged looks. Official recognition meant resources and protection, but it also meant expectations, obligations, potential compromises to their independence. What would that entail? Darius asked. Trade, information sharing, agreement to provide refuge to military personnel if needed. In exchange, we'd provide supplies, security support, and formal recognition of your territorial claims. We'd need to discuss it with the community. Of course, I'm not expecting an answer now, just wanted to make the offer. Reeves smiled. You've done well, both of you, against odds that should have killed you. I'm impressed. And that's not a word I use often. They held a community meeting to discuss the military's offer. Opinion was divided. Some wanted the security and resources, others feared losing their independence. The debate went on for hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. Finally, Kaela stood. Whatever we decide together. That's been our principle from the beginning, so let's vote. Everyone in favor of accepting the military's offer? About 2/3 of the hands went up. Against? The remaining third raised their hands. Then we accept, with the understanding that if this becomes a problem, if it compromises who we are, we can revisit the decision. Kaela looked around the hall. We're still Thornhaven, still a place for people who don't fit elsewhere. That doesn't change. The agreement was formalized a week later. Thornhaven became an official ally of the Northern Military District, with all the benefits and responsibilities that entailed. They established regular trade caravans, set up communication lines, agreed to provide refuge to military deserters with just cause, and they kept growing. By the third year, Thornhaven had over 100 residents. They'd built a school, a proper forge, a mill, a meeting hall that could accommodate everyone. They'd established successful farms, hunting territories, trade relationships with other settlements. They'd become something real, something lasting. Kaela stood on the hill overlooking the valley one evening, watching smoke rise from dozens of chimneys as people prepared dinner. Children played in the commons. Adults returned from their day's work. Normal life continuing in a place that shouldn't exist. Thinking deep thoughts? Darius asked, coming up beside her. Thinking about how different this is from where I started. 3 years ago, I was being sold to a beggar to settle debts. Now I'm helping run a settlement that people travel weeks to reach. Now you're building something that matters. He took her hand. You know what Margaret would think if she could see this? That I'd gotten above my station, that I was pretending to be something I wasn't. Exactly. And that's how you know you've succeeded. Because the people who tried to keep you small would hate what you've become. Kaela thought about Margaret, about Greystone, about Thomas Garrett, and everyone else who'd thought she was worthless. They'd been wrong. Not because she was secretly special or destined for greatness, but because she'd refused to accept their assessment, had chosen to become something different. Margaret's dead, Kaela said. But sometimes I still hear her voice, telling me I'm not good enough, that I'm fooling everyone and eventually they'll realize what I really am. And what's that? Nothing. Nobody. A servant girl pretending to be a leader. Darius pulled her close. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who survived hell and decided to build heaven. Someone who chose fairness when hierarchy would have been easier. Someone who leads not by demanding obedience, but by earning trust. He paused. You're not pretending to be a leader. You are one. And a better one than most people with actual training and experience. You're biased. Completely. Doesn't make me wrong. They stood there watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and orange. Below them, Thornhaven lived and breathed and continued growing. A place built on the radical idea that everyone deserved a chance. That past failures didn't determine future worth. That outcasts and refugees could create something beautiful if given the opportunity. The next day, riders appeared at the valley entrance. But these weren't refugees or traders. They were from Greystone, or what was left of it. The settlement had been rebuilding slowly after the bandit raid. Now they were sending a delegation to Thornhaven, seeking trade relations, possibly alliance. And at the head of that delegation was someone Kaela recognized. Former deputy, Harrison. One of the men who'd watched her suffer without intervening. We've heard about this place, Harrison said, addressing the gathered crowd. About what you're building here. We're impressed. And we're hoping to establish formal relations. Why? Kaela asked. She stood at the front with Darius and the other core members of Thornhaven's leadership. Why would Greystone want anything to do with us? With me? Harrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. Because we made mistakes, let bad things happen that we should have stopped, and because you've built something here that proves there's a better way. A better way than what? Than how we did things. The hierarchies. The casual cruelty. The acceptance of suffering as normal. Harrison met her eyes. You were treated terribly in Greystone. We all knew it, and we did nothing. That shame, it's not going away. But maybe we can do better now. Learn from what you've built. Kaela studied him, trying to gauge sincerity. Was this real remorse, or just pragmatic recognition that Thornhaven had resources and influence Greystone needed? Probably both. People were complicated like that. What kind of relations are you proposing? Trade, primarily. Maybe exchange of knowledge. We've learned some things about farming in drought conditions. You've clearly figured out community organization. We could benefit each other. It was reasonable, practical. The smart move was to accept, establish ties, build broader networks of cooperation. But something in Kaela resisted. These were people who'd watched her suffer, who'd enabled Margaret, who'd represented everything she'd fought to escape. I need to think about it, she said. Discuss it with our community. We'll send word when we've decided. Harrison nodded, accepted their hospitality for the night, and left the next day. The community meeting that followed was intense. Opinion was deeply divided. Some people were from Greystone, had family there, wanted to reestablish connections. Others were running from places like Greystone and saw any alliance as a betrayal of Thornhaven's principles. Kaela let the debate rage for hours before finally standing to speak. I understand both sides. I do. But I think we need to remember something important. We're not defined by who hurt us. We're defined by what we choose to do next. She took a breath. Greystone treated me like garbage, but isolating ourselves from them doesn't change that, doesn't heal it. What heals it is building something better and then offering that to others, even others who failed us. So you want to accept their offer? Someone asked. I want to accept it on our terms. Trade, yes. Knowledge exchange, yes. But no political alliance, no compromise of our principles. We deal with them as equals, not as supplicants begging for what they can provide. Kaela looked around the room. They come here. They follow our rules, our customs. They see what we've built, and they learn from it. That's the relationship I'm willing to accept. The vote was close, but ultimately in favor. Thornhaven and Greystone established limited trade relations, exchanges of goods, occasional visits, careful cooperation. And gradually, as people from Greystone visited and saw what Thornhaven had become, things changed. They saw a community without rigid hierarchies, without casual cruelty, where past status didn't determine present worth. Some of them wanted to join. Some were refused. Screening was strict, and not everyone who'd enabled injustice got redemption. But some were accepted after proving they'd actually changed, actually learned. The years passed. Thornhaven grew from a settlement to a small town. They expanded their territory carefully, establishing satellite communities in nearby valleys. Developed sophisticated systems of governance that balanced individual voice with practical decision-making. Became known throughout the region as a place of refuge and renewal. Kaela's role evolved. She wasn't just a co-founder anymore. She'd become something like a judge, mediating disputes and interpreting the principles they'd established. People sought her guidance on everything from resource allocation to social conflicts to questions of justice and fairness. She hated it and loved it in equal measure. Hated the responsibility, the weight of others' expectations. Loved the fact that she could make a difference, could help create something better than what she'd escaped. 5 years after leaving Greystone, a rider arrived from Commander Reeves's camp. The message was simple. Voss and his co-conspirators had been tried, convicted, and executed for the attack on the trading post. Justice. Delayed, but delivered. Kaela read the message and felt nothing. Or not nothing exactly, just a quiet closure. Voss was dead. Martha was avenged. The past was finally, officially over. She found Darius in the training yard teaching new arrivals basic self-defense. He'd gotten older, they both had. Scars and gray hair, and the weight of experience showing in lines around his eyes. But he moved with the same controlled power, the same careful competence that had kept them alive in those early desperate days. Voss is dead, she said. He stopped mid-demonstration. How do you feel about that? Relieved, satisfied, ready to stop looking over my shoulder. She watched the trainees struggling through basic forms. We did it, didn't we? Actually built something lasting. We did, though it's not done. Never will be. There's always more work, more problems, more challenges. Good, I'd get bored otherwise. They stood there watching the training session, comfortable in each other's silence. The marriage that had started as a transaction, a desperate bid for freedom, had become something real, not perfect. They fought, disagreed, drove each other crazy regularly, but real, based on choice and respect and shared struggle. That evening, the community gathered for their weekly meeting. Over 100 people now, filling the expanded hall they'd built. Business was discussed, decisions were made, Conflicts were addressed. The messy, inefficient, beautiful process of democracy in action. Near the end, a young woman, new arrival, maybe 17, stood nervously. "I have a question for Kaela." "Go ahead," Kaela said. Kaela C.
People say you were nothing before you came here, that you were a servant, treated like garbage, sold off like property. The girl's voice shook slightly. How did you become this? How did you go from nothing to building all this?
Kaela thought about the question, about the 3 years with Margaret, about the desperate marriage to a beggar, about learning to fight in the wilderness and killing a man at the trading post and standing up to Thomas Garrett, and every other moment that had brought her here.
I didn't go from nothing to something, she said finally. I was never nothing. None of us are.
But I believed I was nothing because that's what people told me. The change wasn't becoming something. It was realizing I already was something, that I'd always been something, and choosing to act like it. The hall was silent. Then the young woman nodded, sat down, and Kaela saw understanding in her eyes. Recognition. Maybe hope. The meeting ended. People dispersed to their homes, their lives, their routines. Kaela and Darius walked back to their cabin under stars that seemed impossibly bright. "That was a good answer," Darius said, to the girl's question. It was the truth. The only answer that mattered. "Think she believed you?" "I think she wanted to." That's enough to start with. They reached their cabin, larger now, with real furniture and a working stove, and all the small comforts they'd earned through years of brutal labor. Inside, Kaela lit a lamp and looked around at the space they'd created. Their space. Their choice. Their life. She thought about Margaret, dead in Greystone's ruins. About her father, dead before the story really started. About Martha, who'd died protecting her. About everyone who'd helped, and everyone who'd hindered, and everyone who'd simply existed along the way. And she realized that she wasn't angry anymore. Not at Margaret for her cruelty, or her father for dying, or even Thomas for being what he was. The anger had burned itself out somewhere along the way, replaced by something quieter but more powerful. Purpose. Direction. The knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. "You know what the best part is?" Kaela said to Darius. "Margaret sold me to get rid of me, to dispose of a problem. And instead, she gave me everything I needed to become this. If she'd kept me, broken me completely, I'd probably still be there, surviving but not living. She thought she was destroying me, but she freed me." Ironic. Perfectly ironic. Kaela smiled. "I should thank her, if she wasn't already dead." They went to bed and Kaela slept without nightmares, without fear, without the constant weight of worthlessness that had defined her first 18 years. She woke the next morning to sunlight through the window and the sounds of Thornhaven waking up around her. People moving, working, living, building futures that hadn't seemed possible before they arrived here. And Kaela Shaw, who'd started as nothing, been treated like nothing, been told she was nothing, stood and got dressed and went out to face another day of leading the community she'd helped create from desperation and determination and the simple refusal to accept what others said she was. She'd been discarded, cast out, sold like livestock, and from that abandonment she'd built something beautiful, something that mattered, something that proved, beyond any doubt, that even in the harshest world, even starting from the lowest point, strength and courage and choice could rewrite destiny. Margaret had been wrong. Greystone had been wrong. Everyone who'd dismissed her had been wrong. And Kaela Shaw had spent 5 years proving it, one brutal day at a time.